Introduction. Mind control is an idea that has fascinated people for many years. Stories have been told by the media and in movies about groups of people who have been brainwashed or hypnotized into doing things that they would have never done otherwise. There are people on both sides of the issue. Some believe that there is no such thing as mind control and that it is all just made up, while others believe that they could be manipulated by the mind control at any moment. This guidebook is meant to explain some of the different types of mind control, how they work, and whether or not they can have a daily life application. Chapter 1 starts out talking about the different types of mind control that are available and which will be discussed in more detail throughout the book. These mind control techniques involve brainwashing, hypnosis, manipulation, persuasion, and deception. This chapter is meant to give an excellent introduction to each of these types of mind control in order to set the stage for the later chapters. Chapter 2 continues with talking about brainwashing. Topics such as what brainwashing is, the steps that are used during brainwashing, how brainwashing has been used as a court defense throughout history, and some of the common tactics that can be used during the brainwashing process. Much of this chapter is devoted to discussing the different steps that are used during the brainwashing processes, such as the 3 stages, the breaking down of the self, the possibility of salvation, and the rebuilding of the new self. Next, Chapter 3 discusses the mind control technique of hypnosis. The first section spends some time talking about what hypnosis is and includes information on the induction, suggestion, and susceptibility stages. Other topics that are discussed in the chapter includes the applications of hypnosis, such as hypnotherapy, and the different types of hypnosis ranging from traditional hypnosis to video hypnosis and even subliminal hypnosis. Chapter 4 changes course a little to describe some of the mind control techniques that might be occurring in daily life. While the first 2 techniques would require the isolation of the subject and the subject to be willing, these other forms can sometimes occur without the subject's consent or even knowledge. Chapter 4 talks about the first of these, which is manipulation. This chapter will spend some time discussing what manipulation is and some of the techniques that will be used in manipulation. Chapter 5 spends some time discussing the mind control technique of persuasion. It will delve into what persuasion includes, the different elements of persuasion, along with the methods used to persuade the subject and different persuasion techniques. Chapter 6 is the final chapter of this guidebook and will take a look at the mind control technique of deception. Deception is something that many people are familiar with, although many might not recognize it as a form of mind control. In this chapter, the topics about deception, including what is deception, the main components of deception, and the uses of deception, will be discussed. There is a lot of information provided in the world about the various forms of mind control. While some of them will require a lot of time and effort to change the mind of the subject, such as in the case of brainwashing, others will occur throughout daily life, such as with deception, manipulation, or persuasion. Understanding these different forms of mind control can help to make it easier to be in control of your mind and limit the influence that others have on your own belief systems and identity. Also, by understanding this various mind control techniques, you will be able to apply some of the methods. However, if you decide to take this path, make sure you do so with extreme caution, because mind control, if applied maliciously, can be a dangerous thing and get you into serious trouble. So without further ado, let's begin and explore the fascinating topic of mind control. Chapter 1 Types of mind control. The idea of mind control has been around for many years now. People have had both fascination and fear of what would happen if someone were able to control their minds and make them do things against their will. Conspiracy theories run abound about government officials and other people of power using their talents to control what small groups of people are doing. Even some court cases have been brought up using the excuse of brainwashing as an explanation for why they committed the crime they are accused of. Despite the dramatization of mind control that has been portrayed in the media and the movies, there is little is known about the different types of mind control and how each of they work. This chapter will explore a little bit about the most common types of mind control as an introduction to explaining more about this interesting topic. While there are many different types of mind control that can be used to control the intended victim, there are 5 that are most commonly thought of. These include brainwashing, hypnosis, manipulation, persuasion, and deception. These will all be discussed below. Brainwashing is the first type of mind control to discuss. Brainwashing is basically the process where someone will be connived to abandon beliefs that they had in the past to take new ideals and values. There are a lot of ways that this can be done, although not all of them will be considered bad. For example, if you are from an African country and then move to America, you will often be forced to change your values and ideals in order to fit in with the new culture and surroundings that you are in. On the other hand, those in concentration camps or when a new dictator government is taking over, they will often go through the process of brainwashing to convince citizens to follow along peacefully. Many people have misconceptions of what brainwashing is. Some people have more paranoid ideas about the practice, including mind control devices that are sponsored by the government and that is thought to be easily turned on like a remote control. On the other side of things, there are skeptics who do not believe that brainwashing is possible at all and that anyone who claims it has happened is lying. For the most part, the practice of brainwashing will land somewhere in the middle of these two ideas. During the practice of brainwashing, the subject will be convinced to change their beliefs about something through a combination of different tactics. There is not just one approach that can be used during this process, so it can be difficult to put the practice into a neat little box. For the most part, the subject will be separated from all of the things that they know. From there, they will be broken down into an emotional state that makes them vulnerable before the new concepts are introduced. As the subject absorbs this new information, they will be rewarded for expressing ideas and thoughts which go along with these new ideas. The reward is what will be used to reinforce the brainwashing that is occurring. Brainwashing is not something that is new to the society. People have been using these techniques for a long time. For example, in a historical context, those who were prisoners of war were often broken down before being persuaded to changes sides. Some of the most successful cases of these would result in the prisoner becoming a very fervent convert to the new side. These practices were very new in the beginning and would often be enforced depending on who was in charge. Over time, the term brainwashing was developed and some more techniques were introduced to make the practice more universally. The newer techniques would rely on the field of psychology, since many of those ideas were used to demonstrate how people might change their minds through persuasion. Many steps go along with the brainwashing process. It is not something that is going to just happen to you when you walk down the street and talk to someone that you have just met. First off, one of the main requirements that come with brainwashing being successful is in that the subject must be kept in isolation. If the subject can be around other people and influences, they will learn how to think as an individual and the brainwashing will not be effective at all. Once the subject is in isolation, they will undergo a process that is meant to break down their self. They are told that all the things they know are false and are made to feel like everything they do is wrong. After months of going through all of this, the Subject will feel like they are bad and the guilt is going to overwhelm them. Once they have reached this point, the agent will start to lead them towards the new belief system and identity that is desired. The subject will be led to believe that the new choices are all their own, and so it is more likely to stick. The whole process of brainwashing can take many months to even years. It is not something that is going to happen in just a conversation, and for the most part it will not be able to happen outside of prison camps and a few isolated cases. Chapter 2 will go into more detail of what occurs during the 3 main stages of brainwashing and how the whole process occurs. For the most part, those who undergo brainwashing has done so when someone is just trying to persuade them of a new point of view. For example, if you are in an argument with a friend and they convince you that their ideas make sense, you have technically gone through brainwashing. Sure, it might not be evil and you were able to think about it all logically, but you were still convinced to change the beliefs that you held before. It is very rare that someone undergoes true brainwashing where they will have their whole value system replaced. It will usually occur during the process of coming around to a new point of view, regardless of whether the tactics used were forcible or not. Hypnosis. The next type of mind control is well known as hypnosis. There are a lot of different definitions of what hypnosis is. According to the American Psychological Association, hypnosis is a cooperative interaction where the hypnotist will provide suggestions that the participant will respond to. Many people have become familiar with the techniques of hypnosis thanks to popular performances where participants are told to do ridiculous or unusual tasks. Another form of hypnosis which is gaining in popularity is the kind that uses this practice for its therapeutic and medical benefits, especially when it comes to the reduction of anxiety and pain. In some instances, hypnosis has been able to reduce dementia symptoms in a few patients. As you can see, there are a lot of different reasons that hypnosis that can be used. The point where it starts to become mind control is when the hypnotist can recommend suggestions that can be harmful or change the way that the participant acts in their surroundings. Most people, when they hear about hypnosis, they think about a person on stage who is swinging a watch back and forth to put the participant in a trance. If you have been to a stage show for entertainment, you may have some images in your head of the ridiculous acts that the participants perform. In reality, those who are going through what is considered real hypnosis is going through a process that is very different from this image. The hypnotist does not hypnotize the individual. Rather, the hypnotist serves as a sort of coach or tutor whose job is to help the person become hypnotized, said John Kilstrom. This means that the hypnotist works to get the participant into an altered state of mind so that they are more open to suggestions that are given. Many of the people who undergo hypnosis says that they are in a sleep-like trance kind of state. Despite these thoughts, while under hypnosis, the participant is in a state that includes vivid fantasies, heightened suggestibility, and focused attention. This new state makes them more susceptible to the suggestions that the hypnotist will be giving to them. It is hard to detail the effects that hypnosis can have on subjects since the experiences will vary quite a bit for each person who undergoes it. Some subjects will report feeling like they are detached from the whole experience, some will feel extremely relaxed during the hypnosis, and still others will feel that the actions they are doing will occur outside of their conscious choices. On the other side of things, individuals will state that they are fully aware of their surroundings and will even be able to carry out conversations during their hypnotic state. Some experiments that have been done by Ernest Hilgard shows that hypnosis can be used to alter the perceptions of the subjects. An experiment conducted by Hilgard included instruction of the subject to not feel any pain in their arm. After they were told this, the subject had their arm placed in some ice water. Those who did this experiment and were not hypnotized and needed to take their arms out of the water in just a few seconds since they felt pain. Those who were hypnotized were capable of leaving their arms in the water for a few minutes without experiencing pain. While more research will need to be done, this study shows how strong mind control can be when using the technique of hypnosis. There are many different applications demonstrated through research that hypnosis can be used for, including treating chronic pain such as that found with rheumatoid arthritis, treating and reducing the pain that comes during childbirth, reducing the symptoms that are associated with dementia. Some ADHD patients have seen a reduction in their symptoms after using hypnotherapy, reducing cases of vomiting and nausea in chemotherapy patients, controlling pain during dental procedures, eliminating and reducing skin conditions such as psoriasis and warts, alleviating symptoms that are associated with irritable bowel syndrome. These are just a few of the uses that have become common with hypnosis. While many people are under the misconception that using hypnosis is used to control the subject and make they perform horrific acts or denounce their own beliefs, the most common uses are those for improving the health of the individuals. Most experts agree that the effect of hypnosis as a form of mind control is not a reality. While it may be possible to convince the mind to make a few changes in the habits and behavior of the subject, it is not likely that the subject will change their whole system of beliefs just through this process. Many of the people who are certified in this profession will use it to assist the subject in self-improvement and pain management rather than for trying to take over their minds. Manipulation is another form of mind control that can be used in various ways to determine the way that the individual will think. In this guidebook, manipulation will refer to psychological manipulation. This is a type of social influence that works to change the behavior or perception of others. This is done using abusive, deceptive, and underhanded tactics. This form of mind control is used to advance the interests of the one manipulating, often at the expense of others. The methods that are used are often considered deceptive, devious, abusive, and exploitative. Many people will recognize when they are being manipulated or when others are being manipulated around them, but they do not recognize this as a form of mind control. This can often be a difficult form of mind control to avoid due to the fact that the manipulation will usually occur between the subject and someone they know well. Manipulation leaves the subject feeling like they have no choice in the matter. They will have been told outright lies or half-truths and did not realize the full extent of the situation until it is too late. If they find out about the situation ahead of time, the agent will be able to blackmail and use the subject in order to get to the final goal. The subject essentially becomes stuck because the agent will have crafted everything out in such a way that they will not get in trouble. The subject can take the blame or get hurt if it comes to that, and that the agent will make it to their final goal. The most difficult thing about this is that the agent is incapable of feeling the needs of their subject or any other person. They are not going to care if the subject gets harmed in the process, whether it is emotional or physical harm. While the subject will be emotionally invested in the situation, the agent will be able to walk away, as long as they meet their final goal, without feeling any remorse or regret at what occurred along the way. This can be a dangerous form of mind control because the agent is going to be an expert at it, being able to blackmail, threaten, and do whatever else is necessary. At times they may even be able to turn things around so that the subject feels like they are going insane. Persuasion is another form of mind control that is similar to manipulation in that it works to influence the behaviors, motivations, intentions, attitudes, and beliefs of the subject. There are many different reasons that persuasion could be used in everyday life, and often it is a necessary form of communication to get people of differing ideas on the same page. For example, in business, the process of persuasion will be used to change a person's attitude towards some object, idea, or event that is going on. During the process, either written or spoken words will be used to convey reasoning, feelings, or information to the other person. Another time that persuasion can be used is to meet a personal gain. This would include trial advocacy, when giving a sales pitch, or during an election campaign. While none of these are considered evil, they are still used in a way to influence the listener to act or think in a certain way. One interpretation of persuasion is that it uses one's positional or personal resources to change the attitudes or behaviors of others. There are also several different types of persuasion that are known. The process of changing the beliefs or attitudes through appeals to reason and logic is known as systematic persuasion. The process where beliefs and attitudes are changed because of an appeal to emotions or habits are known as heuristic persuasion. A persuasion is a form of mind control that is used in society all of the time. When you talk to someone about politics, you might try to persuade them to think the same way that you do. When you are listening to a political campaign, you are being persuaded to vote a certain way. When someone is trying to sell you a new product, there is a lot of persuasions that is going on. This form of mind control is so prevalent that most people do not even realize that it is occurring to them at all. The issue will occur when someone takes the time to persuade you into believing ideals and values that do not match up to your system of values. There are a lot of different kinds of persuasion that is available. Not all of they have evil intent, but all of they are going to work to get the subject to changing their minds about something. When a political candidate comes on television, they are trying to get the subject, or the voter, to vote a certain way on the ballot on election day. When you see a commercial on television or online, the company who presented the advertisement is trying to get the subject to purchase that product. All of these are types of persuasion that is bent on trying to get the subject to change the way that they think. Deception. Finally, deception is also considered a form of mind control because of the effect that it can have on the subject. Deception is used to propagate in the subject beliefs in events and things that just are not true, whether they are complete lies or just partial lies. Deception can involve a lot of different things, including sleight of hand, propaganda, and dissimulation, concealment, camouflage, distraction. This form of mind control is so dangerous because the subject often does not know that any mind control is going on at all. They have been convinced that one thing is true when the complete opposite is right. This can get dangerous when the deceit is hiding information that could keep the subject safe. Often, deception is seen during relationships and will usually lead to feelings of distrust and betrayal between the two partners. When deception occurs, there has been a violation of the relational rules and can make it difficult for the partner to trust the other for a long time. It can be particularly damaging because most people are used to trusting those around them, especially relational partners and friends, and expect them to be truthful to them for the most part. When they find out that someone they are close to is deceiving them, they may have issues with trusting others and will not have the sense of security that they are used to. Deception can cause a lot of issues in a relationship or within the agent and subject. The subject will have a lot of issues trusting the agent in the future once they find out about the deception. There will be times when the deception will be done to help out the relationship. These would include things such as not telling a spouse when someone says something mean about them. Other times the deception is more spiteful or Harmful, such as when the agent is hiding important information from the subject or is even deceiving in the person that they are. No matter what type of deception is being deployed, most people agree that deception is harmful and should not be done. Chapter 2. Brainwashing. This chapter is going to focus on the process of brainwashing and all the components that come with it. Through the media and the movies that are seen, many people see brainwashing as an evil practice that is done by those who are trying to corrupt, influence, and to gain power. Some who really believe in the power of brainwashing believe that people all around them are trying to control their minds and their behavior. For the most part, the process of brainwashing occurs in a much more subtle way and does not involve the sinister practices that most people associate with it. This chapter will go into a lot more detail about what brainwashing is and how it can influence the subject's way of thinking. What is brainwashing? Brainwashing in this guidebook will be discussed in terms of its use in psychology. In this relation, brainwashing is referred to as a method of thought reform through social influence. This kind of social influence is occurring all throughout the day to every person, regardless of whether they realize it or not. Social influence is the collection of methods that are used in order to change other people's behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes. For example, compliance methods that are used in the workplace could technically be considered a form of brainwashing because they require you to act and think a specific way when you are on the job. Brainwashing can become more of a social issue in its most severe form because these approaches work at changing the way someone thinks without the subject consenting to it. For brainwashing to work effectively, the subject is going to need to go through a complete isolation and dependency due to its invasive influence on the subject. This is one of the reasons that many of the brainwashing cases that are known about occur in totalistic cults or prison camps. The brainwasher, or the agent, must be able to gain complete control over their subject. This means that they must control the eating habits, sleeping patterns, and fulfilling the other human needs of the subject, and none of these actions can occur without the will of the agent. During this process, the agent will work to systematically break down the subject's whole identity to basically make it not work right anymore. Once the identity is broken, the agent will work to replace it with the desired beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. The process of brainwashing is still up for debate whether or not it will work. Most psychologists hold the beliefs that it is possible to brainwash a subject as long as the right conditions are present. Even then, the whole process is not as severe as it is presented in the media. There are also different definitions of brainwashing that make it more difficult to determine the effects of brainwashing on the subject. Some of these definitions require that there must be some sort of threat to the physical body of the subject in order to be considered brainwashing. If you follow this definition, then even the practices done by many extremist cults would not be considered true brainwashing, as no physical abuse occurs. Other definitions of brainwashing will rely on control and coercion without physical force in order to get the change in the beliefs of the subjects. Either way, experts believe that the effect of brainwashing, even under the ideal conditions, is only a short-term occurrence. They believe that the old identity of the subject is not completely eradicated with the practice. Rather, it is put into hiding and will return once the new identity is not reinforced anymore. Robert J. Lifton came up with some interesting thoughts on brainwashing in the 1950s after he studied prisoners of the Chinese and Korean war camps. During his observations, he determined that these prisoners underwent a multi-step process to brainwashing. This process began with attacks on the sense of self with the prisoner and then ended with a supposed change in beliefs of the subject. There are 10 steps that Lifton defined for the brainwashing process in the subjects that he studied. These included 1. An assault on the identity of the subject. 2. Forcing guilt on the subject. 3. Forcing the subject into self-betrayal. 4. Reaching a breaking point. 5. Offering the subject leniency if they change. 6. Compulsion. 2. Confess. 7. Channeling the guilt in the intended direction. 8. Releasing the subject of supposed guilt. 9. Progressing to harmony. 10. The final confession before a rebirth. All of these stages must take place in an area that is in complete isolation. This means that all of the normal social references that the subject is used to coming in contact with are unavailable. In addition, mind-clouding techniques will be employed in order to expedite the process, such as malnutrition and sleep deprivation. While this might not be true of all brainwashing cases, often there is a presence of some sort of physical harm which contributes to the target having difficulty in thinking independently and critically like they normally would. Breaking down of self. The first stage of the brainwashing process is the breaking down of the self. During this process, the agent wants to break up the old identity of the subject in order to make them feel more vulnerable and open to the desired new identity. This step is necessary in order to continue on the process. The agent is not going to be very successful with their endeavors if the subject is still firmly set in their resolve and their old identity. Breaking up this identity and making the person question the things around them can make it easier to change the identity in the later steps. This is done through several steps, including assault on the identity of the subject, brining on guilt, self-betrayal, and then reaching the breaking point. Assault on identity. The assault on the identity of the subject is basically the systematic attack on the subject's sense of self, or their ego or identity, along with their core system of belief. It makes the subject question who they are by making them think that everything they have ever known is wrong. The agent will spend a great deal of time denying everything that the subject is. In prisoner camps, for example, the agent will say things like, "You are not defending freedom, you are not a man, and you are not a soldier." The subject will be under attacks like these constantly for days up to months. This is done in order to exhaust the subject so that they become disoriented, confused, and exhausted. When the subject reaches this kind of state, their beliefs will start to seem less solid and they might start to believe the things that they are told. Guilt. Once the subject has gone through the assault on their identity, they will enter the stage of guilt. The subject will be constantly told that they are bad while going through this new identity crisis that has been brought on. This is done in order to bring a large sense of guilt onto the subject. The subject will be constantly under attack for any of the things that they have done, regardless of how big or small the acts may be. The range of the attacks can vary as well. The subject could be criticized for their belief systems, to the way that they dress, and even because they eat too slowly. Over time, the subject is going to start to feel shame around them all of the time, and they will feel that all the things they are doing are wrong. This can help to make them feel more vulnerable and likely to go along with the new identity the agent wants to produce. Self-betrayal. Now that the subject has been led to believe that they are bad and that all of their actions are undesirable, the agent is going to work to force the subject to admit that they are bad. At this point, the subject is drowning in their own guilt and feeling very disoriented. Through the continuance of the mental attacks, the threat of some great physical harm, or a combination of the two, the agent will be able to force the subject to denounce his old identity. This can include a wide variety of things, such as getting the subject to denounce their own peers, friends, and family who share the same belief system as them. While this process may take a while to occur, once it does, the subject will feel like he betrayed those that he feels loyal to. This will also increase the shame, as well as the loss of identity that the target is already feeling, further breaking down the identity of the subject. Breaking point. By this point, the subject is feeling very broken down and disoriented. They may be asking questions such as where am I? Who am I? And what should I do? The subject is in an identity crisis at this point and is going through some deep shame. Since they have betrayed all of the beliefs and the people that he has always known, the subject is going to go through a nervous breakdown. In psychology, this just means a collection of severe symptoms that often indicate a large number of supposed psychological disturbances. Some of the symptoms can involve general disorientation, deep depression, and uncontrolled sobbing. The subject may have the feelings of being completely lost along with having a loose grip on reality. Once the subject reaches this breaking point, they will have lost their sense of self and the agent will pretty much be able to do whatever they want with them at this point, since the subject has lost their understanding of what is going on around them and who they are. Also at this point, the agent will set up the various temptations that are necessary in order to convert the subject towards a new belief system. The new system will be set up in a way to offer salvation to the subject from the misery that they are feeling. Possibility of salvation. After the agent has been effective at breaking down the self of the subject, it is time to move on to the next step. This step involves offering the subject the possibility of salvation only if they are willing to turn away from their former belief system and instead embrace the new one that is being offered. The subject is given the chance to understand what is around them, are told that they would be good again, and that they would feel better if they would just follow the new desired path. There are 4 steps that are included in this stage of the brainwashing process: leniency, compulsion to confession, channeling of the guilt and releasing of the guilt. Leniency is the I can help you stage. The subject has been broken down and forced to turn away from the people and the beliefs that they have held on to for so many years. They have been told that they are bad and that everything they do is wrong. The subject is going to feel lost and all alone in the world, shameful at all of the bad things that they have done and wondering which way they can turn. When they reach this stage, the agent is able to offer them some form of release by offering to help them. This will often be in the form of a reprieve from the abuse the subject has incurred or some other small kindness. For example, the agent can offer a little extra food or a drink of water to the subject, or even take a few moments to ask the subject personal questions about home and loved ones. In the subject's current state, these small acts of kindness will seem like a big deal, resulting in the subject feeling a big sense of gratitude and relief towards the agent. Often, these feelings are way out of proportion in comparison to the offering that has been made. In some instances, the subject may feel like the agent has done the act of saving their life rather than just offering a small service. This distortion of events works in the favor of the agent, as the subject is now going to gain ties of loyalty with the agent rather than things of the past. Compulsion to confession. Once the agent has been able to gain the trust of their subject, they will try to get a confession out of the process. This stage is often known as the "you can help yourself." During this stage of the brainwashing process, the subject starts to see the differences between the pain and guilt that they felt during the identity assault and the relief that they are feeling from the sudden leniency that is offered. If the brainwashing process is effective, the subject may even start to feel a desire to reciprocate some of the kindness that has been offered to them by the agent. When this occurs, the agent will be able to present the idea of confession as a possible means to relieving the subject of the pain and guilt that they are feeling. The subject will then be led through a process of confessing all of the wrongs and sins that they have done in the past. Of course, these wrongs and sins will be in relation to how they affect the new identity that is being created. For example, if the subject is a prisoner of war, this step will allow them to confess the wrongs that they did by defending freedom or fighting against the regime of the other country. Even if these are not necessarily wrongs or sins, they go against the new ideology that the regime is always right and so they must be confessed. Channeling of guilt. Once the subject enters the channeling of guilt step, they have been undergoing the assault of their self for many months. By the time the subject reaches this point in the brainwashing process, they are able to feel the guilt and the shame that has been put on them, but it has pretty much lost its meaning. They are not able to tell you exactly what they have done wrong to make them feel this way. They just know that they are wrong. The agent will be able to use the blank slate of the subject in order to explain why they are in the pain that they are feeling. The agent will be able to attach the sense of guilt that the subject is feeling to whatever they want. If the agent is trying to replace a system of beliefs, they will take the old system and convince the subject that those beliefs are what are making them feel the guilt. This is the stage where the contract between the old beliefs and the new beliefs are established. Basically, the old belief system has been established to correspond with the psychological agony that the subject has been feeling, while the new belief system has been established to correspond with the ability to escape that agony. The choice will be the subject's, but it is pretty easy to see that they would choose the new system in order to start feeling better. Releasing of guilt. In this step, the subject has come to realize that their old values and beliefs are causing them pain. By this time they are worn down and tired of feeling the guilt and shame that has been put on them for many months. They start to realize that it is not necessarily something that they have done that makes them feel this way. Rather, it is their beliefs that are causing the guilt. The embattled subject is able to feel some relief from the fact that there is something that they can do about the guilt. They will also feel relieved because they now have come to the understanding that they are not the bad person, rather it is the people that they have been around and their belief system that is the true culprit that is causing the malaise, which is something that they can fix in order to become good again. The subject has learned that they have a means of escape simply by escaping the wrong belief system that they have held and embracing the new one that is being offered. All that the subject will have to do in order to release the guilt that they are feeling is to denounce the institutions and people that are associated with the old belief system, and then they will be released from the guilt. The subject now has some control over this stage. They will be able to realize that the release of guilt is up to them completely. All the subject will need to do for this stage in order to be released from the wrongness is to confess to any of the acts they have committed that are associated with the old belief system. Once the full confession is done, the subject will have completed the full psychological rejection of their former identity. The agent will need to step in at this point in order to offer a new identity to the subject and help them to rebuild their identity into the desired one. Rebuilding of self. By this step, the subject has gone through a lot of steps and emotional turmoil. They have been put through an ordeal that is meant to strip them of their old identity, told that they are bad and need to be fixed, and slowly come to the realization that their belief system is the cause of their wrongness and that it needs to be changed. Once all of this has been reached, the subject is going to need to learn how to rebuild their self, with the help of the agent. This stage allows the agent the freedom to implant the ideas of the new system, since the subject is a clean slate and very eager to learn how to be and feel better. There are two steps that are seen during this stage, including harmony and the final confession before starting over. Harmony. The agent will use this step in order to convince the subject that it is their choice to make a change. They might tell the subject that they have the choice to choose what is good and make a change that will help them to feel better. The agent will then introduce the new belief system and present it in a way that makes it the good or the right choice. During this stage, the agent will stop the abuse and instead make a point of offering the subject mental calm and physical comfort. The point of doing this is to align the old beliefs with the pain and suffering while aligning the new beliefs with happiness and relief. This stage is set up so that the subject is given the choice of which road to take, even though it really is not up to them. The subject must use this stage to choose between the old beliefs and the new beliefs, effectively determining how they are going to feel for the rest of their lives. By this point, the subject has already gone through the process of denouncing their old beliefs due to the leniency and torment that they have gone through. Because of this, it is fairly likely that they are going to make the choice for the new system of belief in order to relieve their guilt. The new identity that has been presented is desirable and safe because it is completely different than the old identity that led to the breakdown in earlier steps. Using logic and considering the state of mind that the subject is in, it is easier to see that the only identity that the subject is going to choose for their own peace of mind and safety is the new one. Final confession and starting over, even though the choice is really not theirs at all. The agent has strategically worked the whole time to lead the subject to feeling like they have the free will to choose the new identity. If the brainwashing process is done correctly, the subject will think logically about the new choices and determine that the best one is to take up the new identity. They have been conditioned to think this way, and in their new state of mind, it is the one that makes the most sense. There are no other choices. Choosing the new identity allows them to be relieved from the guilt that they feel and leads to happiness, while choosing the old identity leads to pain and guilt. If for some reason the subject did deny the new identity, there would be a backtracking in the whole brainwashing process, and they would be forced to undergo it all again in order to end up with the desired results. During this stage of the process, the subject gets to decide that they will choose good, which means that they get to choose to go with the new identity. When the subject contrasts the agony and pain of their old identity with the peacefulness that comes with the new, they are going to choose the new identity. This new identity is like a form of salvation. It is the thing that helps them to feel good and not have to deal with guilt and unhappiness anymore. As this stage completes, the subject is going to reject their old identity and will go through a process of pledging allegiance to their new one, knowing that it is going to work at making their life better. Many times, there are ceremonies and rituals that occur during this final stage. The conversion from the old identity to the new identity is a big deal, since much time and energy has been used on both sides. During these ceremonies, the subject will be inducted into the new community and embraced with the new identity. For some brainwashing victims, there is the feeling of rebirth during this period. You are allowed to embrace your new identity and are welcomed with open arms into the new community that is now your own. Instead of being isolated and alone, you have many new friends and community members on your side. Instead of feeling the guilt and pain that has plagued you for many months, you are going to feel happiness and peacefulness with everything that is around you. The new identity is now yours, and the brainwashing transformation is complete. This process can take place over a period of many months to even years. Most people are set in their identity and the beliefs that they have. It is not possible to change all of this in just a few days unless the person was already willing to change, and that would make the brainwashing techniques unnecessary. Isolation would also be necessary because outside influences will prevent the subject from relying on the agent during this process. This is why most of the brainwashing cases occur in prison camps and other isolated instances. The vast majority of people will not have the chance of encountering brainwashing due to the fact that they are always surrounded by people and technology that would hinder the whole brainwashing process. Once the person is in isolation, the process takes a long time due to the many steps that must be taken in order to change the ideals held by the individual for many years so that they will embrace the new identity as their own while also feeling that the choice has always been theirs. As can be seen, there are quite a few steps that must be taken in order to go through the brainwashing process. It is not something that is going to happen just by running into someone on the street and exchanging a few words. It requires the isolation and time to convince the subject that everything they know is wrong and that they are a bad person. It then continues on with trying to force out a confession that the subject is bad and that they want to renounce all of the things that they have done that are bad due to their old identity. Finally, the subject will be led in the direction of believing that they can change for the better if they just abandon their old ideas and instead embrace the peacefulness and rightness that comes with the new identity that is presented. All of these steps must occur for the brainwashing to be effective and the new identity to be put in place. Brainwashing as court defense. Throughout history, people have been claiming that they committed terrible wrongs because they had been brainwashed. It was an excuse that many would claim, hoping to save their own lives or to get away with a mass murder or some other crime against humanity. It might even be something as simple as stealing from another person. Whatever the action was, brainwashing was an easy defense because it took the responsibility of the action away from the accused, and it was difficult to prove whether someone had been brainwashed or not. Whether brainwashing pleas can be used as a defense in the courtroom is up to some debate. Many experts feel that by allowing this defense into the courtroom, the courts would become overwhelmed with false claims of brainwashing, and the resources for proving or disproving this defense would be more than the courts could handle. Despite this, there have been some cases brought to court that may show the validity of brainwashing as a defense for crimes committed. The first example of this happened in 1976. Patty Hearst, the heiress to a large publishing fortune, used the defense of brainwashing when she stood trial for a bank robbery. In the early 1970s, Hearst was kidnapped by the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army, and ended up joining this group. During the trial, Hearst reported that she had been locked up in a closet for at least a few days after she had been kidnapped. While in the closet, Hearst stated that she was afraid of her life, brutalized, tired, and was not fed while members of the SLA bombarded her with their ideology against a capitalist country. Within the 2 months of her kidnapping, Patty had changed her name while also issuing a statement saying that her family were Pig Hearsts, and then appeared on the security tape of a bank robbing it along with those who had kidnapped her. In 1976, Patty Hearst stood trial for this bank robbery and was defended by F. Lee Bailey. In the defense, it was claimed that Hearst had been brainwashed by the SLA. This brainwashing had forced Hearst to commit a crime that she would have never done under any other circumstance. In the mental state that she was under with the brainwashing, she was not able to tell the difference between right and wrong, and therefore should not be found guilty of the bank robbery. The court did not agree with this analysis and instead found her guilty and placed her in prison for 7 years. Just a few years later, President Carter commuted her sentence, so she only ended up spending 2 years in total in prison. Lee Boyd Malvo case. Another well-known brainwashing defense is the Lee Boyd Malvo case. This case used the defense of insanity by brainwashing, and it ended up in the courtrooms about 30 years after the Patty Hearst case. In 2002, Lee Boyd Malvo was on trial for the role that he played in the sniper attacks that occurred around and in Washington, D.C. Malvo, who was 17 at the time, and John Allen Muhammad, 42, ended up killing 10 people and wounding 3 during the killing spree. The defense that was used for this case was that the teenage Malvo had been brainwashed by Muhammad so that he would commit the crimes. Just like in the Hearst case, the defense claimed that Malvo would not have committed these crimes if he had not been under the control of Muhammad. According to the background story used by the defense, Malvo had been abandoned by his mother on the island of Antigua in the Caribbean when he was 15 years old. Muhammad met the boy and brought him into the United States in 2001. Muhammad was an army veteran at the time and worked to fill the head of the teen with visions of a race war that was impending. To that end, Malvo was trained to be an expert marksman. In addition to sharing these ideas with Malvo, Muhammad isolated Malvo from others while being steeped in the vitriolic, an idiosyncratic brand of Islam that Muhammad followed along with a strict exercise regimen and diet. All of this is believed to have been a part of the brainwashing process on the young Malvo. The defense argued that because of his time spent with Muhammad, Malvo had been brainwashed. And because of this, he was not capable of telling what was right from what was wrong. Despite the efforts of the defense, Malvo was found to be guilty and had a sentence of life in prison without any chance of parole. In a separate trial, Muhammad was sentenced to the death penalty. So far, it does not seem like brainwashing will gain much ground as a form of defense in the courtroom. To start with, it is much too difficult to prove that a defendant has been brainwashed in the first place. Next, it is very unlikely that someone has been brainwashed and instead the defense is just using it as a means to get a lighter sentence or the actions of their client forgiven. In addition, many juries seem to find the idea of brainwashing completely ridiculous. Overall, this defense will probably not see much strength growing in the courtroom. Common tactics used in brainwashing. Brainwashing is not always as intense as what has been described so far in this chapter. The methods described are used for true brainwashing and are rarely done to the subject. There are many other types of brainwashing that actually happen on a day-to-day basis. They might not work to make you completely give up your old identity in favor of a new one, but they do work to help shift your thoughts and ideas on what is going on around you. This section is going to focus on some of the tactics that are often used during the brainwashing process. Regardless of whether it is true brainwashing or not, hypnosis, which will be discussed in more detail in the next chapter, is a form of brainwashing in some circumstances. Hypnosis is basically the induction of a high state of suggestibility. This state is often disguised thinly as meditation or relaxation. During the process of hypnosis, the agent is able to suggest things to the subject in hopes of getting them to act or react in a certain way. Many people are familiar with hypnosis from the stage shows they have seen. It is also often used as a way to improve health. Peer pressure. Everyone has an innate need to belong. This could be with a particular group, their family, friends, and the community. With the peer pressure tactic, there is a suppression of the doubt that the subject feels, along with getting rid of their resistance to new ideas by exploiting this strong need to belong. If done right, the subject may be more willing to try out new things, be less shy around new people, and may have an easier time making new friends. Love bombing. The sense of family is very strong in people. This is the group that you were born into, and that you have supposedly been around for your whole life. They know you better than anyone, and those who have missed out on this kind of relationship may find that they are feeling alone and unwanted. With love bombing, the agent is able to create a sense of the family by the use of emotional bonding. feeling and through sharing and physical touch. This allows the agent and the subject to bond in a familial way, making it easier to trade in the old identity for the new one. Rejecting old values. As mentioned a little bit earlier in this chapter, the agent is working to convince the subject to denounce all of their own values. This process is accelerated through the process of intimidation, physical threat, and other means. At the end, the subject will denounce the values and beliefs that they once held close and will begin to accept the new lifestyle that is presented to them by the agent. Confusing doctrine. In this tactic, there will be an encouragement to blindly accept the new identity while rejecting other logic that the subject will have. In order to do this, the agent will go through a complex set of lectures about a doctrine that is going to be incomprehensible. The subject will learn to blindly trust what the agent is saying through this process, whether it is about the doctrine or about the new identity that is being formed. Metacommunication. This tactic is employed when the agent works to implant subliminal messages into the mind of the subject. This will be done when the agent stresses certain words or phrases that are key to the new identity. These phrases and key words will be implanted into confusing long lectures that the subject will be forced to sit through. No privacy. Privacy is a privilege that many subjects will lose until they have converted over to the new identity that is provided to them. Not only is this taken away as a method to make the guilt and wrongness more apparent to the subject, but it also takes away the ability the subject has to logically evaluate the things that they are being told. If the subject is allowed to have privacy, they will have time to privately contemplate the information they are given and may discover that it is untrue or does not hold up to what they already believe. Taking away this privacy means that the agent or agents are always around and the subject is always being led to the new identity. Disinhibition. During this tactic, the subject is encouraged by the agent to give childlike obedience. This makes it easier for the agent to shape the mind of the subject. Unbending rules. The rules that are put in place by the agent are often strict and will never be changed. These rules are meant to make it difficult for the subject to think and act on their own. Rather, they will spend their time doing exactly what they are told to do by the agent. There are many different rules that could fit into this category, such as the rules that will be followed for the disorientation and regression process, all the way to how the subject is allowed to use medications, take bathroom breaks, and eat meals. These rules are put in place in order to completely control the subject during the brainwashing process. Verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is one of the tactics that is used during the breaking down stage. Often the subject will become desensitized when they are bombarded with abusive and foul language all of the time. At times, physical abuse may supplement or replace verbal abuse. Sleep deprivation. When a person is not getting the amount of sleep that they require, they will often become vulnerable and disoriented. This can help create the ideal environment that the agent is looking for during the breaking down and confession stages of the brainwashing process. In addition, many times the subject will be required to do prolonged physical and mental activities on top of the inadequate sleep in order to hurry the process even more. Dress codes. Enforcing a dress code further removes any individuality that the subject may have, as well as the choice they are used to of picking out their own clothes. Often during the brainwashing process, the subject will be demanded to wear the dress code held by the rest of the group. Chanting. The agent will work to eliminate any non-cult ideas that may be present in the mind of the subject. One way to accomplish this is through chanting or repetition of the phrases that are used by those who follow the new identity. Confession. Confession is deeply encouraged in those who are transforming from their old identity to the new identity. During this process, the subject will destruct their own individual ego by confessing all of their innermost feelings of doubt and personal weaknesses to the agent. Once they are able to let go of these things, the introduction of the new identity is able to occur. Financial commitment. In some cases, there will be financial contributions which must be met. This can help the agent in several ways. First, the financial commitment allows an increased dependence of the subject on the group because the subject may be burning bridges to their past. They will donate different assets, whether it is their car, house, money, or some other financial contribution in the hopes that they will be able to get over their shame and guilt. Now they are financially attached to the new identity. In addition, the agent will be able to use these financial contributions to further their own needs. Pointing the finger. When you are able to point the finger at someone else, you will feel a sense of righteousness. This is your way of telling the world that you are good simply by pointing out some of the shortcomings that are going on in the world. The agent may point out all of the killing, racism, and greed that are in the world before contrasting it to the good of the new identity that the subject is being led to. Isolation. If you are isolated from everything that is around you, it becomes difficult to get outside opinions that might change your mind. This is what the agent will strive for because they do not want all of their work to go away. Those who are being brainwashed will be separated from society, friends, family, and any other rational references that would change their way of thinking. Controlled approval. The agent is going to work in order to maintain the confusion and vulnerability of the subject during the breaking down period. One method of doing this is through controlled approval. The agent will alternately punish and reward similar actions, making it difficult for the subject to know what is right and what is wrong. Change of diet. Changing the amount of food the subject is allowed to consume is another tactic used to create disorientation, while increasing the susceptibility of the subject to emotional arousal. When the agent dramatically decreases the amount of food that the subject is allowed to consume, they are depriving the subject's nervous system of the nutrients that are necessary to thrive. Adding drugs to the mix may also be added into this category. Games. Games are sometimes used in order to induce more dependence on the group. Games will be introduced and most of them will have really obscure rules that the subject will not understand. In some instances, the subject will not be told the rules and they must figure them out or the rules will constantly change. This tactic allows the agent to gain more control. No questions. During the brainwashing process, the subject is not allowed to ask questions. Questions promote individual thinking and this is dangerous to the brainwashing practice. When no questions are allowed, it helps the agent accomplish an automatic acceptance from the subject to the new identity. Guilt. The subject has been told that they are bad and that everything they do is bad. Guilt is a common tactic that is used by the agent in order to make the subject question their beliefs and what is going on around them. The sins of the subject's former lifestyle will be exaggerated in order to bring about the guilt and reinforce the need of salvation in the subject. Fear. Fear is a powerful motivator and can accomplish a lot more than the other tactics that have been listed. Agents may use fear in order to maintain the obedience and loyalty that are desired to the group. To do this, the agent may threaten the limb, life, or soul of the subject for anything that is against the new identity that is being presented. These are just a few of the tactics that can be used during the brainwashing process. The point of each of them is to instill the idea that the old identity of the subject is wrong and convince them that the new identity is preferable. There are many different ways that this can be done and many will be more effective when used as a combination. While it is possible that brainwashing can alter the way that someone thinks and acts, most experts believe that True brainwashing is exaggerated and cannot be done. While little examples of brainwashing may occur in everyday life, the majority of people will not find that their whole belief systems have been changed through this process. Chapter 3. Hypnosis. While brainwashing is a well-known form of mind control that many people have heard of, hypnosis is also an important type that should be considered. For the most part, those who are familiar with hypnosis know about it from watching stage shows of participants doing ridiculous acts. While this is a type of hypnosis, there is a lot more to it. This chapter is going to concentrate more on hypnosis as a form of mind control. What is hypnosis? To start with is the definition of hypnosis. According to experts, hypnosis is considered a state of consciousness that involves the focused attention along with the reduced peripheral awareness that is characterized by the participant's increased capacity to respond to suggestions that are given. This means that the participant is going to enter a different state of mind and will be much more susceptible to following the suggestions that are given by the hypnotist. It is widely recognized that there are two theory groups that help to describe what is happening during the hypnosis period. The first one is known as the altered state theory. Those who follow this theory see that hypnosis is like a trance or a state of mind that is altered, where the participant will see that their awareness is somewhat different from what they would notice in their ordinary conscious state. The other theory is the non-state theories. Those who follow this theory do not think that those who undergo hypnosis are entering into different states of consciousness. Rather, the participant is working with the hypnotist to enter a type of imaginative role enactment. While in hypnosis, the participant is thought to have more concentration and focus that couples together with a new ability to intensely concentrate on a specific memory or thought. During this process, the participant is also able to block out other sources that might be distracting to them. The hypnotized subjects are thought to show a heightened ability to respond to suggestions that are given to them, especially when these suggestions come from the hypnotist. The process that is used in order to place the participant into hypnosis is known as hypnotic induction and will involve a series of suggestions and instructions that are used as a type of warm-up. There are many different thoughts that are brought up by the experts as to what the definition of hypnosis is. The wide variety of these definitions comes from the fact that there are just so many different circumstances that come with hypnosis, and no one person has the same experience when they are going through it. Some of the different definitions of hypnosis by experts include the following. 1. A special case of psychological regression, Michael Nash. 2. Ernest Hilgard and Janet Hilgard have written in great depth about hypnosis and describe it as a way for the body to dissociate from itself in another plane of consciousness. 3. Sarbin and Co., two well-known social psychologists, have used the term of role theory to describe hypnosis. Under this definition, the participant is playing the role of being hypnotized. They are acting like they are hypnotized, rather than actually being in that state. 4. According to T.X. Barber, hypnosis is defined based on the different non-hypnotic behavioral parameters. Under this definition, the participant will define the task motivation and label the situation that they are in as hypnosis, since they have no other thing to call it. 5. Weitzenhofer wrote in some of his earlier writings about hypnosis. He conceptualized that hypnosis is a state of enhanced suggestibility. In more recent writings, he went on to define the act of hypnosis as a form of influence by one person exerted on another through the medium or agency of suggestion. 6. Brenman and Gill used the psychoanalytic concept of regression in the service of the ego to help describe what hypnosis was all about. Under This definition, the participant is willing to go under hypnosis and into the altered state because it helps out their ego and makes them to feel better. 7. According to Edmonston, a person who has undergone hypnosis is simply in a deep state of relaxation. 8. Spiegel and Spiegel have stated that hypnosis is simply something that happens because of the biological capacity of the participant. 9. Erickson states that hypnosis is an altered, inner-directed, and special state of functioning. The participant is still able to function and is conscious of things around them, but they are in an altered state compared to their normal state. There are many different views and statements that have been made about hypnosis. Some people believe that hypnosis is very real and are paranoid that the government and others around them will try to control their minds. Others do not believe in hypnosis at all and think that it is just sleight of hand. Most likely, the idea of hypnosis as mind control falls somewhere in the middle. There are 3 stages of hypnosis that are recognized by the psychological community. These 3 stages include induction, suggestion, and susceptibility. Each of them is important to the hypnosis process and will be discussed further below. Induction. The first stage of hypnosis is induction. Before the participant undergoes the full hypnosis, they will be introduced to the hypnotic induction technique. For many years this was thought to be the method used to put the subject into their hypnotic trance, but that definition has changed some in modern times. Some of the non-state theorists have seen this stage slightly differently. Instead, they see this stage as the method to heighten the participants' expectations of what is going to happen, defining the role that they will play, getting their attention to focus in the right direction, and any of the other steps that are needed in order to lead the participant into the right direction for hypnosis. There are several induction techniques that can be used during hypnosis. The most well-known and influential methods is braids, eye fixation technique, or braidism. There are quite a few variations of this approach, including the Stanford Hypnotic Susceptibility Scale, SHSS. This scale is the most used tool for research in the field of hypnosis. To use the braid induction techniques, you will have to follow a couple of steps. The first one is to take any object that you can find that is bright, such as a watch case, and hold it between the middle, 4, and thumb fingers on the left hand. You will want to hold this object about 8 to 15 inches from the eyes of the participant. Hold the object somewhere above the forehead so that it produces a lot of strain on the eyelids and eyes during the process, so that the participant is able to maintain a fixed stare on the object at all times. The hypnotist must then explain to the participant that they should keep their eyes always fixed onto the object. The patient will also need to focus their mind completely on the idea of that particular object. They should not be allowed to think of other things or let their minds and eyes wander, or else the process will not be successful. After a short time, the participant's eyes will begin to dilate. With a little more time, the participant will begin to assume a wavy motion. If the participant involuntarily closes their eyelids when the middle and 4 fingers of the right hand are carried from the eyes to the object, then they are in the trance. If not, then the participant will need to begin again. Make sure to let the participant know that they are to allow their eyes to close once the fingers are carried in a similar motion back towards the eyes again. This will get the patient to go into the altered state of mind that is known as hypnosis. While Braid stood by his own technique, he did acknowledge that using the induction technique of hypnosis is not always necessary for every case. In fact, researchers in modern times have usually found that the induction technique is not as important to the effects of hypnotic suggestion as previously thought. Over time, other alternatives and variations of the Original hypnotic induction technique have been developed, although the braid method is still considered the best. Suggestion. The next stage of hypnosis is known as the suggestion stage. When hypnosis was first described by James Braid, the term of suggestion was not used. Instead, Braid referred to this stage as the act of having the conscious mind of the participant focus on one central and dominant idea. The way that Braid did this was to stimulate or reduce the physiological functioning of the different regions on the participant's body. Later on, Braid began to place more and more emphasis on the use of different nonverbal and verbal forms of suggestion in order to get the participant into the hypnotic state of mind. These would include using waking suggestions as well as self-hypnosis. Another well-known hypnotist, Hippolyte Bernheim, continued to shift the emphasis of the physical state of the process of hypnosis over to the psychological process that contained verbal suggestions. According to Bernheim, hypnotism is the induction of a psychical condition that is peculiar and which will increase the susceptibility of the suggestion to the participant. Often, he stated, the hypnotic state that is induced will help to facilitate the suggestion, even though this might not be necessary to start the susceptibility in the first place. Modern hypnotism uses a lot of different suggestion forms in order to be successful, such as metaphors, insinuations, indirect or non-verbal suggestions, direct verbal suggestions, and other figures of speech and suggestions that are non-verbal. Some of the non-verbal suggestions that may be used during the suggestion stage would include physical manipulation, voice tonality, and mental imagery. One of the distinctions that are made in the types of suggestion that can be offered to the participant includes those suggestions that are delivered with permission and those that are more authoritarian in manner. One of the things that have to be considered in regards to hypnosis is the difference between the unconscious and the conscious mind. There are several hypnotists who view the stage of suggestion as a way of communicating that is directed for the most part to the conscious mind of the subject. Others in the field will see it in the opposite direction. They see the communication occurring between the agent and the subconscious or unconscious mind. Proponents of the first class of thought included Bernheim, Braid, and other pioneers of the Victorian age. They believed that the suggestions were being addressed straight to the conscious part of the subject's mind, rather than to the unconscious part. In fact, Braid goes further and actually defines the act of hypnotism as the focused attention upon the suggestion or the dominant idea. The fear of most people that hypnotists will be able to get into their unconscious and make them do and think things beyond their control is simply impossible according to those who follow this train of thought. The nature of the mind has also been the determinant of the different conceptions about suggestion. Those who believe that the responses given are through the unconscious mind, such as in the case of Milton Erickson, bring up the cases of using indirect suggestions. Many of these indirect suggestions, such as stories or metaphors, will hide their intended meaning in order to conceal it from the conscious mind of the subject. Subliminal suggestion is a form of hypnosis that relies completely on the theory of the unconscious mind. If the unconscious mind were not being used in hypnosis, this kind of suggestion would not be possible. The differences between the two groups are fairly easy to recognize. Those who believe that the suggestions will go primarily to the conscious mind will use direct verbal instructions and suggestions, while those who believe the suggestions will go primarily to the unconscious mind will use stories and metaphors with hidden meanings. In either of these theories of thought, the participant will need to be able to focus on one object or idea. This allows them to be led in the direction that is needed in order to go into the hypnotic state. Once the suggestion stage has been completed successfully, the participant will then be able to move into the third stage, susceptibility. Susceptibility. Over time, it has been observed that people will react differently to hypnosis. Some people find that they are able to fall into a hypnotic trance fairly easily and do not have to put much effort into the process at all. Others may find that they are able to get into the hypnotic trance, but only after a prolonged period of time and with some effort. Still others will find that they are not able to get into the hypnotic trance, and even after continued efforts will not reach their goals. One thing that researchers have found interesting about the susceptibility of different participants is that this factor remains constant. If you have been able to easily get into a hypnotic state of mind, you are likely to be the same way for the rest of your life. On the other hand, if you have always had difficulty in reaching the hypnotic state and have never been hypnotized, then it is likely that you never will. There have been several different models developed over time to try and determine the susceptibility of participants to hypnosis. Some of the older depth scales work to infer which level of trance the participant was in through the observable signs that were available. These would include things such as the spontaneous amnesia. Some of the more modern scales work to measure the degree of self-evaluated or observed responsiveness to the specific suggestion tests that are given, such as the direct suggestions of arm rigidity. According to the research that has been done by Deirdre Barrett, there are two types of subjects that are considered highly susceptible to the effects of hypnotism. These two groups include dissociators and fantasizers. The fantasizers will score high on the absorption scales, will be able to easily block out the stimuli of the real world without the use of hypnosis, spend a lot of their time daydreaming, had imaginary friends when they were a child, and also grew up in an environment where imaginary play was encouraged. On the other side of things are the dissociators. This group will often come from a background of trauma or childhood abuse, found ways to forget the unpleasant events that are in their past, and can escape into a numbness. If a person in this group does daydream, it is more in the terms of going blank instead of creating fantasies. Both of these groups scored high on the tests of hypnotic susceptibility. The two groups that have the highest rates of hypnotizability include those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative identity disorder. Applications. Hypnosis as a field and as an idea has been around for a long time. Due to this, various applications have begun to emerge that help to put the process of hypnosis to good use. In fact, the various applications of using hypnosis cross many fields such as entertainment, self-improvement, military uses, and medical uses. Other areas that have recently begun to use hypnotism include rehabilitation, physical therapy, education, sports, and forensics. Even artists have begun to employ hypnotism in order to reach certain creative purposes. This is shown the most by Andre Breton, a surrealist artist, who has employed hypnosis, among other techniques, for his own creative purposes. One of the growing uses of hypnosis is in the field of self-improvement. Many people have chosen to do self-hypnosis in order to help them lose weight, reduce stress, and quit smoking. The following sections will discuss some different fields where hypnosis has been growing, as well as how the process of hypnosis is working in those fields. Hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is the use of hypnosis as a form of psychotherapy. It is used as a method to help the patient or subject through troubling issues that are plaguing them, especially when other methods of self-control are not effective. Licensed psychologists and physicians might perform a form of hypnotherapy on willing patients in order to help them treat post-traumatic stress, compulsive gambling, sleep disorders, eating disorders, anxiety, and depression. It is also possible to visit with a certified hypnotherapist to assist you in treating issues such as weight management and the cessation of smoking. If you go to a certified hypnotherapist, it is important to remember that they are not psychologists or physicians. So they will just be able to assist you with reaching the hypnotic state and not with curing your more serious ailments. It is best that you make sure whoever you are working with has been certified to provide you with these services, whether you choose a hypnotherapist or a physician. The process of hypnotherapy has been seen in many different forms in modern history. All of them have had varying degrees of success depending on the issue faced and the participants. Some of the forms that have been used include cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy. This is a combination of clinical hypnosis along with different elements of the cognitive behavioral therapy. Hypnoanalysis. This is also known as age regression hypnotherapy. Hypnosis to assist with dealing with phobias and fears. Ericksonian hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy to assist with addictions. Hypnotherapy to assist with habit control. Hypnotherapy to assist with pain management in those who suffer from chronic pain. Hypnotherapy to assist in the psychological therapy the patient is already dealing with. Hypnotherapy to assist with relaxation. Hypnotherapy to assist with skin diseases. Hypnotherapy to assist with soothing patients who are anxious about undergoing surgery. Hypnotherapy to assist with the performance of athletes before a competition. Hypnotherapy to assist with weight loss. Military applications. In addition to assisting people who deal with various health issues and addiction, people have long wondered if hypnosis has been used by military and governmental officials in order to change the way citizens think about things. So far, there has been little proof that the American military is capable or has used hypnosis to reach their goals. In fact, a declassified document that was obtained out of the Freedom of Information Act archive recently shows that the process of hypnosis has been investigated for the use in military applications. Despite the research that has been done, the study concluded that there really wasn't any evidence that the process of hypnosis would be useful in a military application. In addition, there was not any evidence that clearly showed that hypnosis actually exists in regards as an actual phenomenon outside of subject expectancy, high motivation, and ordinary suggestion. The document further goes on to explain how it would be nearly impossible for hypnosis to be used in a military application. It states, the use of hypnosis in intelligence would present certain technical problems not encountered in the clinic or laboratory. To obtain compliance from a resistant source, for example, it would be necessary to hypnotize the source under essentially hostile circumstances. There is no good evidence, clinical or experimental, that this can be done. The document goes on to explain that it has been difficult to study the effects and application of hypnosis to be used in the military because no one is able to say with certainty whether hypnosis is a unique state with some conditioned responses or just a form of suggestion that has been induced as a result of the positive relationship between the subject and the hypnotist. Self-hypnosis. There are some instances, such as when a certified hypnotherapist or other professional is not available, when you may decide to use the process of self-hypnosis. This process occurs when a person is able to hypnotize themselves, often using the tactic of autosuggestion. The primary use for this technique is for self-improvement, and many people will perform it in order to reduce their stress levels, quit smoking, or to get the motivation they need to go on a diet. While some people may be able to self-hypnotize themselves, many find that they need some sort of assistance in reaching the altered state. This could include hypnotic recordings or even mind machine devices to help them reach that state. Other areas that you could use self-hypnosis for include your overall physical well-being, to relax, and to get over stage fright. Stage hypnosis. When most people think of hypnosis, they think of stage hypnosis. This is a form of entertainment that will occur in a theater or a club in front of an audience. The hypnotist is often shown as a great showman, and this helps to encourage the idea that hypnosis is completely about mind control. In the beginning of the act, the hypnotist will attempt to put the whole audience under the altered state before selecting certain individuals who meet the criteria to come up on the stage and go through different embarrassing acts while the rest of the group watches. It is unknown why stage hypnosis is so effective, although it is commonly thought to be a combination of trickery, stagecraft, physical manipulation, suggestibility, participant selection, and psychological factors. For the most part, experts believe that the participant is just playing along in a way with the hypnotist and providing a good show. These individuals may be willing to do this because they desire to be in the middle of all the attention, the pressure to please others, and the excuse to go against their own suppressors of fear make it easy to get the participants to perform. Some of the books that have been written by former stage hypnotists reinforce the idea of trickery and deception, and some are entirely composed of fake hypnosis where private whispers were used the whole time. Types of hypnosis. There are a lot of different types of hypnosis that the subject will be able to undergo. Each of them will work in slightly different ways, and some of them work to help with various issues. Some may be more fit to helping the subject to relax, while others can help more with weight loss or pain management. This section will talk in more detail about the different types of hypnosis that are available. Traditional hypnosis. The most common type of hypnosis that is used is known as traditional hypnosis. During this process, the agent is simply making suggestions directly to the subject's unconscious mind. This type of hypnosis will work the best on a subject who is known for accepting the things that they are told, and they do not ask a lot of questions. If you go and visit a certified hypnotist or purchase a tape to do the process of self-hypnosis, you will be going through the process of traditional hypnosis. The reason that this type of hypnosis is so popular is because it does not take that much experience or training to learn how to do. The hypnotist is just going to have to write a simple script and tell the subject what to do. While this technique will work very well on those who accept what is going on around them, it is ineffective for those who think critically and analytically. Ericksonian hypnosis. The next type of hypnosis to be discussed is Ericksonian hypnosis. This one is a little more in depth because it is going to require the use of metaphors and little stories. These are used in order to present the ideas and suggestions that are required to the unconscious mind. Even though this method will require a little more experience and training to do, it is a very effective and powerful method to use. The reason that it works so well is because it is able to eliminate the resistance and blockage that the subject may have to the suggestions. There are two main types of metaphors that will often be used in this kind of hypnosis: isomorphic and interspersal. For the metaphor that is interspersal in nature, the command that is explained has been embedded into the story and would not be easily discovered by the subject outside of their unconscious mind. The other type, isomorphic metaphor, is a little more common and offers directions to the unconscious mind simply by presenting a story to the subject that will offer a moral at the end. The unconscious mind will be able to draw a one-to-one relationship connecting the elements that come from the story and the elements that come with the behavior or problem situation. An example of an isomorphic metaphor is the story, Boy Who Cried Wolf. Many parents will use this story to teach their children about lying, especially if their child tells a lot of lies. After hearing the story, the unconscious mind of the subject would see a parallel between the telling of lies and the boy who is in the story. They would see that telling lies might lead to a disaster, and the child might be more willing to stop lying in the process in order to prevent that disaster from occurring. Embedded technique. Another type of hypnosis is called the embedded technique. During this process, the hypnotist will tell the subject an interesting story. This story is meant to help distract and engage the conscious mind of the subject. It will also contain indirect suggestions that are hidden within the story but which will be accepted into the unconscious mind of the subject. Through this story, the hypnotist will use process instructions in order to direct the unconscious mind of the subject to find the memory that is needed. This memory is usually about learning experience that is appropriate from the past. The hypnotist will then be able to apply that learning experience to help them to make changes to their present. Neuro-linguistic programming. With neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, hypnotists have a great selection of the methods that they are able to use in the hypnosis process. When using the process of NLP, the hypnotist will be able to use the same thought patterns that are creating the problem in the subject. This can save a lot of time compared to going through the process of suggestion. For example, the thought patterns that are used with stress or excessive appetite will be used to help eliminate the problem that the subject is dealing with. If used with a certified hypnotist or psychologist, NLP has been shown to be very effective. There are many different types of NLP programming that have been utilized by hypnotists. Some of the most commonly used forms of NLP include NLP anchoring, NLP flash, and NLP reframe. NLP anchoring. The first type of NLP that will be discussed is NLP anchoring. A good way to think about how anchoring works is thinking about an old song that you know. Have you ever sat in a car and heard a song that you have not heard in a long time? Did that song trigger some sort of feeling in you that came from the past? The first time you heard that song, or sometime down the road when you heard it, you were going through these feelings, and the unconscious mind attached these feelings to that particular song. Through this process, the song would become the anchor for these feelings. Now, each time that you hear this particular song, you will trigger the brain to have these feelings all over again. This is a good example of anchoring. Many hypnotists have found that anchoring is a useful technique for them to use in hypnotizing their subjects. For example, if you have a memory of being rewarded for doing something right in the past, the hypnotist will be able to get into that particular memory and help you to recreate the feelings that you were going through at the time. At the same time, the hypnotist will have you do some sort of action, such as touching your two fingers together during the recreation of the process. Now, each time that you touch your fingers together, you will be able to feel those same happy feelings again. The process of anchoring can work in order to motivate you to accomplish something by associating good feelings with it. For example, this method is often used to help people find the motivation they need to stick to losing weight and maintaining a diet. The hypnotist will work with the subject to create a positive anchor that is associated with the mental image of the subject. In this case, it will be the subject thinking about themselves in a thin and sexy body. When the subject pictures this image again, they will trigger the anchor and get the positive motivation that they need. In fact, there is a dramatic increase in the motivation for weight loss in those who undergo hypnosis compared to those who do not. The process of anchoring can be used in a variety of different instances to assist in self-improvement of the individual. NLP flash is another form of hypnosis that is considered to be extremely powerful and only done by a certified professional. It is often used in order to change thoughts and feelings around in the unconscious mind of the subject. It can be a good way to help those who feel chronic stress or are addicted to a substance. In this process, the hypnotist will switch the feelings of the subject around. Instead of a certain act bringing pleasure, that act will start to bring pain, or instead of a certain act bringing stress, it will bring the subject relaxation. For example, someone who is addicted to a substance, such as cigarettes or alcohol, will find a feeling of pleasure and happiness when they consume that substance. Through the technique of NLP Flash, these feelings will get switched around, resulting in the subject feeling discomfort or pain when they consume the substance. This can help them to get over their addiction more effectively. Those who are undergoing a lot of stress have also found the technique of NLP Flash to work well for them. When a person is feeling chronic stress, they may have difficulties in controlling their blood pressure and their tempers, and are going to feel uncomfortable a lot of the time. Since stress is so hard on the body, there are many patients willing to undergo the NLP Flash hypnosis in order to assist them in relaxing. With this technique, the subject will learn their triggers of stress and redirect them so that those triggers start to release feelings of relaxation in their minds instead. This technique has also been shown to be effective in extinguishing the conditioned responses in the mind of the subject. An example of this is with smoking. If you are a smoker that enjoys a cigarette while having a cup of coffee in the morning, your unconscious brain is going to start pairing these two behaviors together. This means that the subject will get a craving to have a cigarette anytime they enjoy a cup of coffee, especially in the morning. When the subject goes through the NLP Flash technique, they will learn how to dissociate the two events from each other. This allows the smoker to have a cup of coffee without also getting the urge to smoke at the same time. This makes it an even more effective technique to use when trying to stop smoking. NLP Reframe, the third form of NLP that has been used in hypnosis, is known as NLP Reframe. This technique is really potent because it works so well in assisting the subject to change the way that they behave. To do this process, the hypnotist must understand that there is a secondary gain, or a positive outcome, that is accomplished by each of the behaviors that a person accomplishes. The outcome that occurs from the behavior is important, since that is the reason the subject is acting in the first place. Despite the importance of the outcome, the behavior that is chosen to accomplish the outcome is really not that important. During the process of reframe, the hypnotist works to negotiate and reason with the unconscious mind of the subject. The goal is to get it to take over the responsibility for making the subject substitute in some new behavior that is available and effective at accomplishing the required secondary gain. While this is all going on in the subconscious, the new behavior will be more acceptable to the subject in their conscious mind. For example, if the person is in the habit of eating when they are sad in order to make themselves feel better, the hypnotist is going to perform this method to teach the unconscious to do some other activity. The act of eating might be replaced with exercise or reading a nice book, helping the subject to lose weight, eat healthier, and feel better all around. Video hypnosis. While the other forms of hypnosis have been extremely popular in assisting subjects to overcome obstacles and change the way that they think in order to live better lives, new forms of hypnosis are always being developed. One of the newest forms of hypnotherapy that has been developed is video hypnosis. This form is offered through commercial means so that people are able to purchase them and use at their own convenience. The techniques that are used in some of the brands of video hypnosis are also based on the neuro-linguistic programming technology that was discussed earlier. This means that the video hypnosis technique will work based on utilizing the existing thought processes that the subject has rather than using hypnotic suggestion like traditional methods. The reason why video hypnosis has grown so rapidly is that more than 70% of people have found that they learn things easier and more quickly when they see things compared to when they only hear the information. The subject's mind will learn to change the feelings that it is having as well as its visual associations automatically on the conscious level while watching the visual movies that are presented. While there are many different kinds of video hypnosis programs that are available, neurovision is one of the most popular because it has been developed using some of the best techniques in the industry. This type of video method works to train the unconscious mind of the subject through digital optics, which is a high-tech simulation process on the computer. This will free the subject of their tensions, urges, and compulsions. Through this process, the smoker will find that stopping smoking is easy. The dieter will lose their appetite, and those who feel stress will begin to relax more. It will often take at least a few sessions of video hypnosis to see results, although there are those who find that just one viewing will start to show some of the results that they want. Subliminal hypnosis. The final type of hypnosis that will be discussed in this chapter is subliminal hypnosis. Often the subliminal hypnosis messages will be placed on a recording for the subject to listen to. The recording will have 2 tracks and each one will talk to a different part of the mind. One track will contain a cover sound that will be heard through the conscious mind of the subject. The cover sound is often something that is easy for the brain to listen to, such as nature sounds or music. The other track will contain direct suggestions that will be heard through the unconscious mind of the subject. These suggestions present on the second track will be repeated over and over throughout the whole session. Subliminal programs have the ability to be played at any time and in any place. You could be listening to these messages while you are working or even while watching TV. The best part is you will not have to stop the task that you are doing and sit down and relax, like what is required with NLP or traditional hypnosis. In some cases, subliminal programs will be added to your regular hypnotic programs. The use of subliminal programming is not that prevalent. Most people will not choose this method to change their habits and behaviors. Research has shown that subliminal programs are not really that effective, and so they will not be able to replace NLP or hypnosis. By some accounts, it could take more than 80 hours of listening to the subliminal message before it has an effect, and many times even that will not be enough for most people. According to Joel Weinberger, a professor at the Adelphi University and a psychologist, regular audio subliminal tapes that can be purchased at stores or online just do not work. Subliminal psychodynamics may work as long as there is some form of visuals present. The popular options available only contain auditory components. The auditory is not enough to make this method work on its own. Subliminal suggestion will need to be paired with other forms of hypnotherapy in order to have the effectiveness that is desired. Despite the portrayal of hypnosis by the media, it is not an evil plot that is meant to take over the minds of unwilling subjects. In fact, if the subject is not willing to undergo hypnosis, it is pretty much impossible to get them to go into the altered state. Often, the use of hypnosis is to help others improve their lives. This could be in the form of weight management, stopping smoking, improving other health conditions, and assisting with chronic pain management. Each of the techniques is also important in helping the subject to get to their overall goal. While all of them can be effective, the professional that you choose to work with as well as the issue at hand will be used to determine which of these methods will best fit your needs and assist in improving your life. Chapter 4. Manipulation. Brainwashing and hypnosis are the two forms of mind control that easily come to mind. While these two are important to understand the functioning of mind control and how it all works, they are not the only options that are available. There are others that can be used, and are often more effective in the short term than either brainwashing or hypnosis. These particular tactics are ones that can be used in everyday situations, for example like in normal conversations a person may have with others. While it is not likely that a person will be manipulated or persuaded to change major beliefs through normal conversations, they can be convinced to change little things such as being persuaded to purchase cookies from a local Girl Scout or to vote a certain way in an election. The main thing to remember about the next three forms of mind control is that they are more likely to occur in a person's daily life with the people that they know and trust. Obviously, a person is not going to put their subject into isolation or force them into an altered state of mind as with brainwashing. Instead, they will employ different techniques in an effort to change the way their subject thinks. The three types of mind control that fit into this category include manipulation, persuasion, and deception. This chapter is going to discuss manipulation and how it can work to change the way the subject thinks. While manipulation may not put the person who is employing the tactic in harm's way or cause any immediate danger, it is set up to work in a deceptive and underhanded way to change the behavior, viewpoint and perception that the intended subject has in regards to a particular topic or situation. What is manipulation? The first question that is often asked is what manipulation is. In this guidebook we will discuss manipulation in the terms of psychological manipulation, which is a social influence that works to change the behaviors or perception of others, or the subject, through abusive, deceptive, or underhanded tactics. The manipulator is going to work to advance their own interests, usually at the expense of another, so most of their methods would be considered deceptive, devious, abusive, and exploitative. While social influence itself is not always negative, when a person or group is being manipulated, it has the possibility of causing them harm. Social influence, such as in the case of a doctor working to persuade their patients to start adopting healthy habits, is usually perceived to be something that is harmless. This is true of any social influence that is capable of respecting the right of those involved to choose, and is not unduly coercive. On the other hand, if someone is trying to get their own way and is using people against their own will, the social influence can be harmful and is generally looked down upon. Psychological or emotional manipulation is seen as a form of persuasion and coercion. There are many components that can be included in this form of mind control, such as bullying and brainwashing. For the most part, people will see this as abusive or deceptive in nature. Those who decide to employ manipulation will do so in order to attempt to control the behavior of those around them. The manipulator will have some end goal in mind and will work through various abuse forms in order to coerce those around them into helping the manipulator get to the final goal. Often emotional blackmail will be involved. Those who practice manipulation will use mind control, brainwashing, or bullying tactics to get others to complete the tasks for them. The subject of the manipulator may not want to perform the task, but feel that they have no other option due to the blackmail or other tactic used. Most people who are manipulative lack the appropriate caring and sensitivity towards others, so they may not see an issue with their actions. Other manipulators just want to get to their final goal and are not concerned with who has been bothered or hurt along the way. In addition, manipulative people are often afraid to get into a healthy relationship because they are afraid others will not accept them. Someone who has a manipulative personality will often have the inability to take responsibility for their own behaviors, problems, and life. Since they are not able to take the responsibility for these issues, the manipulator will use the tactics of manipulation to get someone else to take over the responsibility. Manipulators are often able to use the same tactics that are found in other forms of mind control in order to get the influence they want over others. One of the most commonly used tactics is known as emotional blackmail. This is where the manipulator will work to inspire sympathy or guilt in the subject they are manipulating. These two emotions are chosen since they are considered the two strongest of all human emotions and are the most likely to spur others into the action that the manipulator wants. The manipulator will then be able to take complete advantage of the subject, using the sympathy or guilt that they have created to coerce others into cooperating or helping them reach their final goal. Often, the manipulator will not only be able to create these emotions, they will be able to inspire degrees of sympathy or guilt that are way out of proportion for the situation that is going on. This means that they can take a situation such as missing out on a party seem like the subject is missing out on a funeral or something that is actually important. Emotional blackmail is just one of the tactics that is employed by manipulators. One of the other tactics that has been successful for many manipulators is to use a form of abuse that is known as crazy making. This tactic is usually aimed with the hope of creating self-doubt in the subject being manipulated. Often this self-doubt will become so strong that some subjects may start to have feelings that they are going crazy. At times, the manipulator will use forms of passive-aggressive behavior in order to bring about crazy making. They might also choose to show support or approval of the subject verbally, but then give non-verbal cues that show contradictory meanings. The manipulator will often actively try to undermine certain events or behaviors while showing their support out loud for that same behavior. If the manipulator is caught in the act, they will use denial, justification, rationalization, and deception of ill intent in order to get out of the trouble. One of the biggest issues with psychological manipulators is that they are not always able to recognize what others around them may need, and they will lose the ability to meet or even consider these needs. This does not excuse the behavior that they are doing, but often the needs of others are not considered or are not a priority to the manipulator, so they are able to perform manipulative tasks without feeling guilt or shame. This can make it difficult to stop the behavior and explain in a rational way why the manipulator must stop. In addition, the manipulator may find that it is difficult for them to form meaningful and long-lasting friendships and relationships because the people they are with will always feel used and will have difficulty in trusting the manipulator. The issue goes both ways in the formation of relationships. The manipulator will not be able to recognize the needs of the other person, while the other person will not be able to form the required emotional connections or trust with the manipulator. Requirements to successfully manipulate. A successful manipulator must have tactics at hand that will make them successful at using people to get to their own final goal. While there are several theories on what makes a successful manipulator, we will take a look at the 3 requirements that have been set out by George K. Simon, a successful psychology author. According to Simon, the manipulator will need to 1. Be able to conceal their aggressive behaviors and intentions from the subject. 2. Be able to determine the vulnerabilities of their intended subject or victims in order to determine which tactics will be the most effective in reaching their goals. 3. Have some level of ruthlessness readily available so that they will not need to deal with any qualms that may arise due to harming the subjects if it comes to that. This harm can be either physical or emotional. The first requirement that the manipulator has to accomplish in order to successfully manipulate their subjects is to conceal their aggressive behaviors and intentions. If the manipulator goes around telling everyone their plans or always acts mean to others, no one is going to stick around long enough to be manipulated. Rather, the manipulator needs to have the ability to conceal their thoughts from others and act like everything is normal. Often, those who are being manipulated will not realize it, at least not in the beginning. The manipulator will be sweet, act like their best friend, and perhaps help them out with some issue or another. By the time the subject is aware of the issue, the manipulator has enough information on them to coerce the subject into continuing on. Next, the manipulator will need to have the capability of determining what the vulnerabilities of their intended victim or victims are. This can help them to determine which tactics need to be used in order to reach the overall goal. Sometimes the manipulator may be able to do this step through a little bit of observation, while other times they are going to need to have some kind of interaction with the subject before coming up with the full plan. The third requirement is that the manipulator needs to be ruthless. It is not going to go well if the manipulator puts in all their work and then worries about how the subject is going to fare in the end. If they did care about the subject, it is not likely that they would be going through with this plan at all. The manipulator is not going to care about the subject at all and does not really care if any harm, either physical or emotional, befalls the subject as long as the overall goal is met. One reason that manipulators are so successful is that the subject often does not realize they are being manipulated until later on in the process. They may think that everything is going along just fine. Perhaps they think that they have made a new friend in the manipulator. By the time the subject realizes they are being used or no longer wants to be a part of the process, they are stuck. The manipulator will be able to use many different tactics, including emotional blackmail, to get their way in the end. How to control victims. One of the things that the manipulator needs to be able to accomplish to see success is to control their subjects. There are several different theories that are available to help explain how the manipulator will be able to do this. Two of the theories that will be discussed in this section include those started by Harriet Bryker and Simon. Harriet Bryker is a clinical psychologist who has written a self-help book. In her book, she has defined 5 basic ways that the manipulator is able to control their subjects. These include positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, partial or intermittent reinforcement, punishment, traumatic learning that only provides one trial. The first 2 tactics that are discussed include positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. In positive reinforcement, the manipulator will use a variety of tactics such as public recognition, facial expressions, like a smile or a forced laugh, attention, gifts, approval, money, excessive apologizing, superficial sympathy, which may include crocodile tears, superficial charm, and praise. The point of utilizing this kind of reinforcement is to give the person a reason to want to be your friend. If you give someone a gift or some money, they might be more willing to help you out when the time comes. If you can make the subject feel sorry for you, then they will have the required sympathy to be on your side later. The other type of reinforcement that can be used is negative reinforcement. In this tactic, the manipulator will remove the subject from a situation that is negative as a reward for doing something else. An example of this would be, "You won't have to do your homework if you allow me to do this to you." Each of these has particular strengths and weaknesses that allow the manipulator to get what they want out of the subject. Often, the manipulator will use a combination of different tactics in order to get the things that they want. Partial or intermittent reinforcement can also be used by a manipulator. This form of reinforcement is used in order to effectively create a climate of doubt and fear in the subject. An example of this comes in gambling. While the gambler may win at times, they are still going to lose some form of money overall, especially if they play for a long time. But the winning is often enough to keep the subject persisting on the same path, long after they are not able to do so. The manipulator will use this tactic to provide reinforcement to the subject at enough intervals to keep the subject coming back. Punishing is another method that is used in order to control the subject of the manipulator. There are a lot of different actions that can fit into this category. They include playing the subject, crying, sulking, using the guilt trip, emotional blackmail, swearing, threats, and intimidation, using the silent treatment, yelling, and nagging. The point of using this method is to make the subject feel like they have done something wrong. The subject will feel bad and want to make things right, falling right back in with the manipulator. Finally, the last method that Bryker mentions in her work is the traumatic one. Trial learning. This is where the manipulator will explode for the littlest things in the hopes of conditioning or training the subject into not wanting to contradict, confront, or upset the manipulator. Some of the tactics that might be used in this method include explosive anger, verbal abuse, and other behavior that is intimidating and used to establish superiority and dominance over the subject. Simon has also come up with a list of tactics that manipulators must use in order to successfully control their victims. Some of these are similar to those listed by Bryker but with some more details. These would include lying. Manipulators are really good at lying to their subjects. Often, the subjects will find that it is difficult to tell when they are being lied to at the time. When the subject finds out about the apparent lie, it is usually too late to do anything about it. The only way that the subject can make sure that they are reducing their chances of being lied to are watching out for different personality types that are experts in the art of cheating and lying. The manipulator will lie about anything in order to get their way, and for the most part their subjects will not have any idea that it is going on until it is too late to do anything about it. Omission lying. This one is similar to the method listed above with a few slight differences. Omission lying is a little more subtle because the manipulator will tell some of the truth but will withhold certain key issues that should have been revealed. In some cases this might be called propaganda. The manipulator might say that they need to borrow some money to get gas to go buy groceries when in reality they need the money to go pick up some drugs or other illegal substance. While they did use the money to purchase gas, just like they said, they left out an important part. The subject probably would not have given the money if they knew the end of the story, and now they may be caught up in something illegal. Denial. Manipulators are experts at denial. None of them will admit that they have done something wrong, even when all of the evidence is pointing towards them. They will always deny everything and often make the subject look to be the one at fault. Rationalization. This is when the manipulator will make up an excuse that makes them look good. They might say they only did the act because they were trying to help the subject. This tactic is also related to the technique of spinning. Minimization. This is a blend of the rationalization and the denial tactics. The manipulator will tell everyone that their behavior is really not as irresponsible or harmful as the subject thought. An example of this would be when the manipulator says that an insult or taunt they performed was just a joke and that the subject should not take it so seriously. Selective attention or inattention. During this tactic, the manipulator works to avoid giving attention to anything that will distract them from their final goal. They will trivialize it and make it seem not that important to them, which it really isn't. An example of this would be when the manipulator says, "I don't want to hear it," Diversion. Manipulators are not only good at lying to their subjects, they are also experts at avoiding giving straight answers to questions that are given to them. If someone asks them a question that they do not like or wants to know outright if they are lying to them, the manipulator will try to push the conversation in another direction. Often the manipulator will briefly give a vague answer to the question before moving the conversation to another topic. Evasion. This tactic is very similar to diversion with a few differences. In this tactic, the manipulator will answer the questions that are given to them, but they will use weasel words, vague responses, ramble, and provide irrelevant responses to the question. They will leave the subject with more questions than answers when they are done. Intimidation. The manipulator will always try to keep the victim on the defensive in order to make sure that they remain on the same team throughout the process. Often this is done by using veiled, implied, indirect, or subtle threats to the subject. Guilt trip. Manipulators like to use the guilt trip as a form of intimidation in order to get the subject to do what they want. The manipulator will try to make the subject feel guilty in some way, such as by saying that the subject has it too easy, is too selfish, or just does not care about the manipulator enough. This will result in the victim starting to feel bad for the manipulator. The subject will then be kept in a submissive, anxious, or self-doubting position, making it easier for the manipulator to still use them. Shaming. The whole goal of the manipulator is to make the subject feel bad or have sympathy for them so that the subject keeps going along with the plan. One way that the manipulator can do this is by using put-downs and sarcasm in order to shame the subject. This tactic will make the subject feel unworthy. Most of the shaming tactics used will be very subtle and would include things such as subtle sarcasm, rhetorical comments, unpleasant tone of voice, or a fierce glance. Playing as a victim. No matter what, the manipulator wants to look like they are the victim, even though they are the one in control. When the manipulator acts like they are the victim of their circumstances or the behavior of someone else, they will be able to evoke compassion, sympathy, and pity. Most people will not be able to stand by and watch as someone suffers, and the manipulator will find that it is easy to get these same people to cooperate with them. Vilifying the subject. This is one of the most powerful tactics that can be used because it will almost instantly put the subject on the role of defense while at the same time hiding the manipulator's aggressive intents. The manipulator will try to turn the circumstances around so that the subject looks like they are the villain and the one who has caused all of the trouble. The subject will then want to find ways to change this outlook and get on the side of the manipulator again, making it easy to be used. Servant role. Manipulators will often hide their own agendas by making it look like the work they are doing is for some noble cause. They only said the mean thing about your outfit because the principal wants to start sprucing up the look of the school and they wanted to help out. The term "just doing my job" would also fit under this category. Seduction. Manipulators can use seduction to get the things that they want. Some tools that fit into this category would include intense support, flattery, praise, and charm. This is done in order to get the subject to lower their defenses. After time, the subject will begin to give their loyalty and trust to the manipulator, who will use it as they please. Projecting the blame. The manipulator will spend a lot of time blaming others for the problems they are having. Often it is hard to detect when this is going on, so no one is able to call them out on it. Feigning innocence. If the manipulator is caught in the act of reaching their own agenda, they will try to suggest that if harm was done, it was completely unintentional. They may even completely deny that they did anything in the first place. When caught, the manipulator will place a look of indignation or surprise on their faces. The point of this tool is to make the victim question their own sanity and judgment, since it looks like they were wrong. Feigning confusion. Another thing that might happen if the manipulator is caught is that they might play dumb. This will happen if the manipulator tries to pretend that they do not have any idea what the subject is talking about. They might also act like they are confused when a critical issue is brought up to them. Brandishing anger. When the manipulator uses anger, it is to get the subject to feel sorry or sympathy for them. If done in the right way, the manipulator will be able to shock their subject back into submission. Often, the manipulator is not really angry, they are just putting on an act in order to get what they want. As can be seen, there are a lot of tools that the manipulator can use in order to get to their final goals. Often, these tactics will be used in such a way that the subject will not realize what is going on in the beginning, and it will take some time for them to catch on. Once they do, the manipulator will be able to employ some of the techniques that will be discussed in the next section in order to keep the subject going in the right direction. The manipulator is skilled at using a combination of these skills to get the things that they want, and it does not matter to them how much they harm the other person in the process. Techniques of manipulation. As discussed before, a manipulator is going to work in order to reach their final goal. In order to reach this final goal, the manipulator will use any technique that they can in order to get people to do what they want. The 5 most common techniques that will be used by a manipulator to reach their final goals include blackmail, emotional blackmail, putting down the other person, lying, and creating an illusion. These will each be discussed in the preceding sections. Blackmail. Blackmail is the first technique that would be utilized by a manipulator. Blackmail is considered an act that involves threats that are unjustified in order to make a certain gain or cause a loss to the subject unless the manipulator's demand is met. It can also be defined as the act of coercion that involves threats of prosecution as a criminal, threats of taking the subject's property or money, or threats of causing physical harm to the subject. There is a long history of the word blackmail. Originally it was a term that meant payments that the settlers rendered to the area that was bordering Scotland to the chieftains in charge. This payment was made in order to give the settlers protection from the marauders and thieves that were going into England. It has since changed to mean something else, and in certain instances it is an offense in the United States. For the purposes of this section, blackmail is more of a threat, either physical or emotional, to the subject in order to coerce them into doing what the manipulator wants. Blackmail is also considered extortion in some cases. Although there are times when the two are considered synonymous, there are some differences. For example, extortion is when someone takes the personal property of another by threatening to do future harm if the property is not given. On the other hand, blackmail is when threats are used in order to prevent the subject from engaging in lawful activities. At times, these two events are going to work together. The person may threaten someone and require money in order to be kept at bay and not cause the subject harm. The manipulator is going to be able to use this technique in order to get what they want. They are going to take the time to learn things of personal nature about their subject, and then they can use that as a form of blackmail against them. They might blackmail their subject by threatening to spill an embarrassing secret or by ruining their chances of getting a new job or promotion. Or the manipulator might work in a more menacing way by threatening to physically harm their subject or the subject's family if they do not agree to go along with the manipulator. Whatever the blackmail may be, it is used to help the manipulator to get to their final goal with the assistance of the subject. Emotional blackmail. Another similar tactic that may be used by the manipulator is known as emotional blackmail. During this technique, the manipulator will seek to inspire sympathy or guilt in their subject. These two emotions are the strongest ones for humans to feel, and they will often be enough to spur the subject into the action that the manipulator wants. The manipulator is going to take advantage of this fact in order to get the thing that they want. They will use the sympathy or the guilt that they inspire in order to coerce the subject into cooperating or helping them. The degree of sympathy or guilt will often be blown out of proportion, making the subject even more likely to help out in the situation. The point of using this type of blackmail is to play more on the emotions of the subject. In regular blackmail, the subject has a threat to deal with, mostly in terms of physical harm to themselves or someone they love. With emotional blackmail, the manipulator will work to inspire emotions that are strong enough to incite the subject to action. While the subject may think that they are helping out of their own free will, the manipulator has worked to ensure that the subject is assisting and will bring out the emotions again whenever it is needed. Putting down the other person. There are other options available to the manipulator if they would like to get their subject to assist in reaching the final goal. One technique that has quite a bit of success is when the manipulator is able to put down their subject. In normal cases, if the manipulator uses verbal skills in order to put their subject down, they will run a high risk of making the subject feel as if a personal attack has been placed on them. When the subject feels like they are attacked, they will bristle and not be willing to assist the manipulator in the way that they want. Instead, the subject will not like the manipulator and will stay as far away from them as possible, making it very difficult for the manipulator to reach their final goal. This is why the manipulator is not going to just go around and put down their subject. They have to be more discreet about the process and find a way to do it without raising red flags or making the subject feel like they are being attacked. One way that this can be done is through humor. Humor is able to lower barriers that might otherwise show up because humor is funny and makes people feel good. The manipulator is able to turn their insult into a joke. Despite the fact that the put down has been turned into a joke, it will work just as effectively as if the joke were not present, without leaving the visible scars on the subject. Often, the manipulator will direct their put down into the form of third person. This helps them to mask what they are saying more easily, along with providing an easy way to deny causing harm if it comes back to haunt them later on. For example, they might start their put down with, "Other people think." If the subject is still able to guess that the comments were made at them, then the manipulator would end it with a throwaway line that might include something like, "Present company accepted, of course." The idea of the put down is to make the subject feel like they are somehow less than the manipulator. It raises the manipulator up to a new level and leaves the subject feeling like something is wanting. The subject is more likely to want to make things better and to fix any wrong that they have done. This will put the manipulator in a position of power, and they will be able to more easily get the subject to assist them. Lying, no matter what the end goal of the manipulator is. Lying is something that they are an expert in and which they will do all of the time to get what they want. There are several different types of lies that can be used by the manipulator that will help them to reach their final goals. One is that they tell complete lies, and others include omitting parts of the truth from their subjects. When the manipulator lies, it is because they know that the lie is going to further their agenda much more effectively than the truth would. Telling someone the truth might make them not want to help the manipulator out, and that would go completely against their plans. Instead, the manipulator will tell a lie to get the subject convinced to do something for them, and by the time the subject finds out about the lie, it is too late to fix the issue. The manipulator might also decide to omit part of the truth in the stories that they are telling. With this method, they are going to tell parts of the truth, but will keep certain things out that are unsavory or which might hinder the progress that is being made. These kinds of lies can be just as dangerous because it will become increasingly difficult to tell what the truth of the story is and what the lie is. It is important to realize that when you are dealing with the manipulator, anything that they tell you may be a lie. It is not a good idea to trust anything that the manipulator is saying, since they are just trying to abuse and use their subjects in order to reach that final goal. The manipulator is going to do and say anything possible, even lying, to get what they want, and they are not going to feel sorry about it. As long as they get what they want, they are not too concerned about how it is affecting the subject or others around them. Creating an illusion. In addition to lying, the manipulator is going to be an expert at creating illusions that are capable of bringing about their final goal more effectively. They will work to create a picture that they want and then convince the subject that this illusion is actually reality. Whether or not it is does not matter to the manipulator. In order to do this, the manipulator is going to build up the evidence that is needed to prove the point that works to their goal. To start the illusion, the manipulator is going to plant the ideas and the evidence into the minds of the subject. Once these ideas are in place, the manipulator will be able to step back for a few days and let the manipulation occur in the subject's mind over that time. After that time, the manipulator will have more of a chance of getting the subject to go along with the plan. Manipulation is a form of mind control that is difficult for the subject to avoid. Unlike brainwashing and hypnosis that was described in the previous chapters, manipulation is able to occur in daily life, and in some instances it can occur without the subject having much knowledge or control of it. The manipulator is going to work discreetly in order to reach their final goal without getting the subject suspicious and derail the process. The manipulator will not worry about who they are hurting or how others might feel, and most of them are not capable of understanding the needs of their subjects. They just know that they want something, and that the subject they have chosen is going to help them to get to their goal. The techniques that are discussed in this chapter are meant to help explain what goes on during the process of manipulation and how the mind of the manipulator will work. It is often best to attempt to steer clear of anyone who might be a manipulator so that you are able to avoid this kind of mind control. Chapter 5. Persuasion. Persuasion is another form of mind control that is going to be discussed. While there might not be as much media hype about this form of mind control as there is with brainwashing and hypnosis, it can be just as effective if done correctly. The issue with this form is that there are just so many different forms of persuasion that are present in daily life that it can be difficult for any one source to get through to the subject and make a difference. While persuasion works to change the thoughts and the beliefs of the subject like the other forms of mind control, it seems like everyone is trying to persuade you about something, so it becomes easier to ignore the persuasion that is coming towards the subject. For example, the commercials on television, when an argument is going on, or even when a conversation is going on, there is some form of persuasion that is occurring. People will often use persuasion to their advantage without noticing. This chapter is going to go into more details about persuasion and how it can be effectively used as a form of mind control. What is persuasion? To start with is the definition of persuasion. When people think about persuasion, they will often come up with many different answers. Some may think of the commercials and advertising that they see all around them that urge the purchase of a certain product over another. Others may think about persuasion in the terms of politics and how the candidates may try to sway the voter's opinion in order to get another vote. Both of these are examples of persuasion because the message is trying to change the way that the subject is thinking. Persuasion can be found in daily life, and it's a very powerful force as well as major influence on the subject and society. Advertising, mass media, legal decisions, and politics all will be influenced by how persuasion works, and in turn it will work on persuading the subject as well. As can be seen, there are some key differences between persuasion and the other forms of mind control which have been discussed so far in this guidebook. Brainwashing and hypnosis will require the subject to be in isolation in order to change their minds and identity. Manipulation will also work on just one person to get to the final goal. While persuasion can be done on just one subject to change their mind, it is also possible to use persuasion on a larger scale in order to persuade a whole group or even society to change the way that they are thinking. This can make it even more effective, and perhaps dangerous, because it has the ability to change the minds of many people all at once rather than the mind of just a single subject. Many people fall under the false impression that they are immune to the effects of persuasion. They think that they would be able to see any sales pitch that is thrown their way, whether the agent is actually selling a product or some new idea, and then be able to comprehend the situation that is going on and find the conclusion through their own logic. In some scenarios, this is going to be true. No one falls for everything they hear all of the time when they use logic, especially if it goes completely against their beliefs, no matter how strong the argument may be. In addition, most subjects will be able to avoid the messages about purchasing televisions and fancy cars or the newest product on the market. Many times the act of persuasion is going to be much more subtle, and it can be more difficult for the subject to form their own opinions about what they are being told. When the act of persuasion is brought up, most people are going to see it in a negative light. They will think of a salesman or a con man who is trying to convince them to change all of their beliefs and who is going to push and bother them until the change occurs. While this certainly is one way to think about persuasion, this process can often be used in a positive way rather than just a negative way. For example, public service campaigns can urge people to quit smoking or recycle, can be forms of persuasion that are able to improve the lives of the subject. It is all in how the process of persuasion is used. Elements of persuasion. As with the other forms of mind control, there are certain elements to be watched out for when it comes to persuasion. These elements help to define exactly what persuasion is so that it is more recognizable. According to Perloff in 2003, persuasion is defined as a symbolic process in which communications try to convince other people to change their attitudes or behaviors regarding an issue through the transmission of a message in an atmosphere of free choice. This is one of the things that make persuasion different from the other forms of mind control. The subject is often allowed to make their own free choices in the matter, even if the tactics of persuasion are going to work to shift the subject's mind in a particular direction. The subject is able to choose which way they want to think, if they want to purchase a product or not, or if they think the evidence behind the persuasion is strong enough to change their minds. There are a few elements that are present in persuasion that help to define it even further. These elements include: persuasion is symbolic, which means that it utilizes sounds, images, and words to get the point across. Persuasion will involve the agent deliberately attempting to influence the subject or group. Self-persuasion is a key part of this process. The subject is usually not coerced, and instead they are given the freedom to choose their own decision. There are many ways that persuasive messages can be transmitted, including face-to-face, internet, radio, and television. The communication can also occur nonverbally or verbally. Let's look at each of these points in a little more detail. The first element of persuasion is that it needs to Be symbolic. In order to persuade someone to think or act in a certain way, you need to be able to show them why they should change their thoughts. This is going to include the use of words, sounds, and images to get the new point across. You can use words to start up a debate or argument to show your point. Pictures are a great way to show the evidence that is needed to persuade someone to go one way or the other. Some nonverbal cues are possible, but they are not going to be as effective as using the words and images. The second key is that persuasion is going to be used in a deliberate way in order to influence the way others are acting or thinking. This one is pretty obvious. If you are not purposely trying to influence others, you are not using persuasion to get them to change. The persuader is going to try different tactics in order to get the subject to think the same way that they do. This could be something as simple as just having a debate with them or presenting evidence that supports their point of view. On the other hand, it could get much more involved and include more deceptive forms to change the subject's mind. More about the techniques that are used in persuasion will be discussed later in this chapter. The unique thing about persuasion is that it allows the subject to have some form of free will. The subject is allowed to make their own choice in the manner. For the most part, no matter how hard someone tries to persuade them of something, they do not have to go for it. The subject might listen to 1,000 commercials about the best car to purchase, but if they do not like that brand or are not in need of a new vehicle at that time, they are not going to go out and purchase it. If the subject is against abortion, it is not going to matter how many people come out and say how great abortion is. The subject is not likely to change their mind. This allows much more freedom of choice than what is found in the other forms of mind control, which might explain why many people do not see this as a type of mind control when asked. Persuasion is a form of mind control that can occur in many different ways. While brainwashing, hypnosis, and manipulation have to occur on a face-to-face basis, and in some cases in complete isolation, persuasion is capable of occurring in other ways. You can find examples of persuasion all over the place, including when you are talking to people you know, on the internet, and through radio and television. It is also possible to provide persuasive messages through nonverbal and verbal means, although it is much more effective when verbal techniques are used. Modern persuasion. Over time, persuasion has been able to evolve and change from its original beginnings. Persuasion has been around for many years. In fact, it has been around since the time of ancient Greece. This does not mean that the art and process of persuasion is exactly the same as it was way back then. In fact, there have been quite a few changes made to the art of persuasion and how it is used in modern times. Some of the key elements of modern-day persuasion will be discussed in this section. Richard M. Perloff has spent quite a bit of time studying modern persuasion, how it is used, and how it can affect society as a whole. He wrote a book called The Dynamics of Persuasion, Communication and Attitudes in the 21st Century, which outlines the 5 ways that the use of modern persuasion is different from how it was used in the past. These 5 ways include: the number of messages that are considered persuasive has grown by leaps and bounds. In the times of ancient Greece, persuasion was used just in writing and in debates among the elites. The occurrence of persuasion was not a big thing and you would not see it very often. In modern times, it is difficult to get anywhere without some message of persuasion following you around. Think of the different types and sources of advertisements that are out there. The average adult in the United States will come across up to 3,000 of these each day. In addition to that, there are always people knocking on your door trying to get you to buy something, believe their ideas, or try something new out. Persuasion is much more a part of modern life than it has been at any other time in history. Persuasion travels really quickly. Back in the times of ancient Greece, it could take weeks or longer for a persuasive message to get from one point to another. This limited the impact of persuasion because most people would not be able to get the message. Most acts of persuasion had to be done in the context of face-to-face communication. In modern times, persuasive messages can cover a large distance in hardly any time at all thanks to the use of the internet, radio, and television. Political candidates can reach constituents all at once in just seconds, and any message can be spread easily. Persuasion takes on a much larger role when it can be spread so quickly. Persuasion can mean a lot of money. Now that companies have discovered the power of persuasion, they are doing everything they can to make it work for them. The more effective they are at persuading consumers to purchase their products, the more money they will make. Some companies are in business solely because of the persuasive process, such as public relations companies, marketing firms, and advertising agencies. Other companies will be able to use the persuasive techniques offered by these companies in order to reach and surpass the sales goals that they set. Persuasion has become more subtle than in the past. In the beginnings of persuasion, the agent would announce their views out loud for the whole group to hear in the hopes of getting them all to change their minds. Those days are over, and the process of persuasion has become much more discreet. While it is possible to find acts of persuasion that are still very loud and in your face, such as in some forms of advertising, many others are following a more subtle route. An example of this is when businesses craft a certain image of themselves, such as being family-friendly, in order to get consumers to purchase their products. You might also notice that instead of getting into a debate with your friend over going to a party, they will use peer pressure or just list a few facts to try and get you to come with them. Despite being more subtle, persuasion is still as effective today as it has ever been. The process of persuasion has become more complex, along with persuasion being more subtle and sometimes harder to point out. It is also going along the road of becoming more complex. The subject being targeted is more diverse than in the past, and they have a lot more choices to make. For example, where once a person just went to the one store in town to purchase everything they need, now they are able to pick from different stores for their needs, from the hardware store to the grocery store and the clothing store. On top of that, there is often more than one option available for each of these shopping categories in the area. All these choices make it more difficult for the agent to find a good persuasive message for the consumer or any other subject. Methods of persuasion. Persuasion methods can often go under other names and be referred to in such ways as persuasion strategies and persuasion tactics. There is not just one method that can be used to persuade someone to think or act in a certain way. The agent may be able to talk to the subject while presenting evidence in order to switch the subject's mind. They may be able to use some sort of force or pull they have against the subject, and they can perform some sort of service for the subject, or use another tactic. This section will go into more details about the different methods of persuasion that are available and how each of them might be effective in the process of persuasion. Usage of force. Depending on the situation, the agent may decide it is a good idea to use some force in order to persuade the subject to think their way. This may happen if the ideas do not match up correctly, regular talking is not working, or when the agent is becoming frustrated or upset with the turn of the conversation. Often force is used as a type of scare tactic because it gives the subject less time to think logically about what is going on compared to when a normal conversation occurs. Usually force will be used when the agent has had less success using the other means of persuasion that are available, although starting with the use of force is sometimes done as well. At other times, force may be used if the agent feels like they are losing control, or when the subject is able to present contradictory evidence to the agent, and the agent becomes angry. Often it is not the best idea to use force when it comes to the process of persuasion. This is because many subjects will see the use of force as a threat due to the fact that the agent will not give other options to the request that they are making. The whole appeal of persuasion is that it offers the subject the choice of paths, but once force is brought into the mix, that freedom of choice is gone and the subject is more likely to feel threatened. Once the subject feels threatened, they are less likely to listen and consider anything that the agent is saying, and so the process will not go any further. Due to these reasons, the use of force is generally discouraged and avoided in the art of persuasion. Unlike the other forms of mind control discussed, weapons of influence, another method that can be used in order to persuade the subject to lean a specific way, is to use the weapons of influence that are available. These 6 influences were developed by Robert Cialdini in his book Influence. This book discusses the art of persuasion and defines the 6 weapons of influence that can make the agent successful in their goals. The 6 weapons of influence are reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. These 6 weapons of influence are very important to the agent, since they are a part of the process of change in their subjects. Each of these 6 weapons will be discussed below. Reciprocity. The first weapon of influence is the principle of reciprocity. This principle states that when one person, the agent, provides the other person, the subject, with something of value, the subject is going to attempt to repay the agent in kind. This basically means, when the agent performs some type of service to the subject will feel that they have an obligation to perform a similar service to the agent at some time. While the 2 services might not be identical, they have the same kind of value, so that the obligation of each is equal out. The act of reciprocation ends up producing a sense of obligation in the subject, which the agent will then be able to use as a powerful tool when they want to use persuasion. The rule of reciprocity is very effective because it helps the agent get the subject into the right frame of mind for the act of persuasion by instilling and overpowering the subject with a sense of obligation. The agent may be more likely to get the subject convinced to do or act a certain way, because the subject will have that sense of obligation hanging over them. Another added benefit for the agent in using reciprocity is that it is not just a moral standing that will put the obligation on the subject, it is also a standing that is held up by social codes. The agent is not going to need to worry about whether the subject has the right moral code to return the favor. If the subject does not feel the need to do so, the agent has some tools available to spur them into action. As a society, people do not like individuals who are negligent in returning a favor or payment when they are offered a free gift or service. If the agent does not feel like the subject is going to reciprocate to them, they will be able to turn them into their social group. They can do this by telling other friends or coworkers about how they did a favor for the subject, but the subject never returned it when it was needed. Now the agent has forced social standards on the subject through the telling of the favor, making it even more likely that they will be able to persuade the subject into doing something. For the most part, the subject will be happy to reciprocate to the agent without needing any outside forces. When the favor is granted, the subject will begin to look for ways that they can repay the agent so that the score is even and they do not seem greedy or selfish. The agent will then be able to provide an easy solution to the subject on how to repay this debt. the subject will feel gratitude at having this easy solution and will be more likely to go the way that the agent wants. Commitment and consistency. The next weapon of influence that is to be discussed is that of commitment and consistency. The agent is going to need to use both of these if they wish to persuade anyone to change to their point of view. When things are consistent, they are easier to understand and can help the subject to make their decisions better. It does not do well for the agent to always change the facts that they are using, or to change other information that is needed in order to help the subject process the information. Rather than helping with the process of persuading, constantly keeping away from consistency is going to make the agent look like a liar and someone who cannot be trusted, resulting in the failure of the persuasion process. Consistency is one of the most important aspects of the persuasion process. This is because consistency is valued highly in society. People like to have things stay a certain way most of the time. While there is a lot of variety in daily life, people feel safe knowing that overall things will stay pretty consistent. It allows them to remember what has gone on, know what to expect, and be prepared if any changes do happen to occur. If consistency were not available, things would be very difficult to plan and there would always be issues of chaos going around. If you wish to persuade a subject of a particular thing, then you must make sure that your facts are consistent and make sense to them. Consistency results in benefiting the daily life approach of most people. Have you ever tried to plan a day out when something unexpected comes up? It can make things almost impossible to do and will end up feeling like a disaster. People like consistency because it allows them to know what to expect and what to do. They know when it is time to eat, when it is time for work, and when other things will happen throughout the day. Consistency provides a shortcut that is very valuable through the complications present in modern existence. Life is difficult enough without having to add in other things that do not make sense. When people are able to have consistent lives, it makes things a whole lot easier. Consistency is a great tool because it allows the subject the ability to make the right decisions and to process information. If the agent wants to be successful in their endeavors of persuading the subject, they need to make sure that their message is consistent. There is no room for false evidence that can show up later and ruin the whole process. Keep the facts truthful and concise, and it is much better for persuading the subject. Something that ties in with consistency is the act of commitment. In order to know that the subject is actually persuaded and that the effort has paid off, it is important to have some kind of commitment in place. In advertising, this can mean that the subject is going to purchase the product, or in politics it can mean that the subject will vote for a particular candidate. The commitment that is made will vary depending on the nature of the persuasion. According to the concept of consistency, if a person commits, either in writing or orally, they are much more likely to honor the commitment that they have made. It has been found that this is even more true in terms of written commitments, since the subject will be more concrete psychologically and there is some hard proof that they agreed to the commitment. This makes a lot of sense. Many people will promise orally that they will fix something or do something, just to turn around and not do it. Sure, some people will do what they said, and they are more likely to do it if promising orally than not promising at all, but often it is still difficult to get the results that you want in this way. In addition, there is no way to back it up, since an oral agreement will just become a he said she said disagreement and no one will win. On the other hand, if the agent is able to produce a written commitment from the subject, they have the proof they need that the thing has been done. The reason that it is so important for the agent to get the subject to agree to a commitment is because once the subject has committed to the new stance, they have more of a tendency to act in a way that is fitting to that commitment. After that point, the subject will continue on and begin to engage in self-persuasion for the cause. They will provide themselves along with others with various justifications and reasons to support the commitment in order to avoid any issues with the agent. If the agent is able to get the subject to that point, the agent will have a lot less work to deal with. Social proof persuasion is a form of social interaction and therefore is going to need to follow the social rules where it is occurring. The subject is going to be influenced by the people who are around them. They are going to be more likely to want to do what others are doing rather than do their own thing. The subject will base their beliefs and action according to what others are doing around them, how these same people act, and how they believe. For example, if the subject grows up in a city, they are more likely to act like others who are from that area. On the other hand, those who grow up in a community that is very religious may spend a lot of their time praying, learning, and helping others. Under this belief, the saying, "the power of the crowd," can be very effective. The subject is going to want to know what other people around them are doing at all times. It has become almost an obsession in this country to be able to do what others are doing in order to fit in, despite the fact that people will say how they want to be different and be an individual. An example that is given about how people will do something because others are doing it can be found with a phone-a-thon. If the host says something like, "Operators are waiting, please call now," the subject may feel like there are operators who are sitting around with nothing to do because no one is calling them. This will make the subject less likely to call because they figure if someone else isn't calling, then they shouldn't either. If the host just changes up a few words and instead says, "If operators are busy, please call again," there can be a very different result. The subject is now going to assume that the operators are busy with the calls of many other subjects, so the organization must be good and legitimate. The subject will be much more likely to call in, whether or not they get through right away or have to be put on hold. The persuasion technique of social proof is the most effective in situations where the subject is uncertain of what they will do or when there seem to be many similarities in the situations. In ambiguous or uncertain situations that have multiple choices or possibilities to be made, the subject will often choose to conform to what others around them are doing. This is because the choices are so similar that any of them will work, but they will assume that the choice the others are making is the one that is right. The other way that social proof can be used is when there are some similarities occurring. For example, the subject is much more likely to conform and change around those who are similar to them in some way. If there is someone who is similar to the subject that is in charge, the subject is likely to listen and follow them more than if the person in charge is very different from the subject. The agent will be able to use the idea of social proof to help with their process of persuasion. The first way they can do this is watching the wording that they are saying. With the example given of the game show, both of the quotes were saying the same thing, but by switching up the wording they came up with two different meanings. Neither of them were a lie, they were just effective at eliciting a different kind of response. If the agent is able to watch the way that they word things, they can elicit the right response out of their subjects and convince the subject to follow the same ideas and beliefs. In addition, the agent will find that there is more success if they are able to get those who are similar to them to share in the ideas. This is why politicians will try to campaign to groups with the similar ideas to them. If they need to reach a larger group, they will modify their ideas in order to make them more appealing to these new groups. Liking the agent is going to work very hard in order to get the subject to like them. There is a very simple reason for this. If the subject likes the agent, they are much more likely to say yes to them. There are two main factors that will contribute to how well the subject likes the agent. The first one is physical attractiveness and the second is similarity. For the first one, if the agent is more attractive physically to the subject, they are going to have the feeling of being more persuasive since they are able to get what they want more easily while also changing the attitudes of others. This attractiveness factor has been proven effective in sending favorable messages and impressions of other traits that the agent may have, including intelligence, kindness, and talent. This all works together to make it more likely that an attractive person will be able to more easily persuade the subject. The second factor, similarity, is a little simpler. The idea states that if the subject is similar to the agent, they are much more likely to answer in the affirmative to what the agent is asking. This process is pretty natural, and most of the time the subject will not have to think about whether it is the right thing to do when they like and are similar to the agent. Authority. One of the ways that the agent will be successful in persuading the subject is to become an authority. There is a tendency in most people to believe that something an expert says on a subject is true. The subject is more likely to enjoy listening to an agent that is trustworthy and knowledgeable. This means that if the agent can bring these two things to the table, then they are already on the way to getting their subject to listen and believe them. There have been studies done to show how this authority technique can work in persuading the subject to listen to what the agent has to say. The study done was known as the Milgram study and was actually a whole series of experiments started in 1961. The participants consisted of two subjects and each was placed into different rooms. The first subject was then attached to a harness that was electric and which could administer the shock. The second subject was instructed by the agent, who was dressed up in a scientist's coat and looked official, to ask the first subject questions and then to punish them whenever a question was answered incorrectly. The second subject was asked by the agent to deliver electrical shocks that came from a panel that was under the second subject's control. After delivering a shock, the second subject had to pick the next highest voltage to use the next time and would continue to do this until the highest voltage of 450 volts was reached. One thing that was not known to the second subject was that the first subject was simply an actor who was faking the pain. This first subject was not actually being harmed in the process. This experiment was conducted in order to see how well the second subject would obey someone in authority, not to harm someone on purpose. The statement that went along with this study was, when an authority tells ordinary people it is their job to deliver harm, how much suffering will each subject be willing to inflict on an entirely innocent person if the instructions come from above? According to this study, most of the second subjects were willing to provide as much pain to the first subject as was available. This led to the conclusion that most subjects are willing to place pain upon others if they are told to do so by an authority figure of some sort. Of course, when it comes to persuasion, pain is not something that is necessary at all times in order to change the way that people think. This study was just an illustration of how the subject is going to react to the agent if the agent is able to prove they are some sort of authoritarian person. Keeping this in mind can help the agent to reach their own agenda. Scarcity. Scarcity is another form of persuasion that people may be familiar with but which is often underestimated. When a product or idea has a limited availability, it is more likely to be assigned a higher value. According to Cialdini, people want more of what they cannot have. While this might sound like it is describing a child who is trying to get into the cookie jar when they are told no, it can also describe how regular adults will act when There is the issue of scarcity to consider. The context is going to matter as well. This simply means that within specific contexts, the idea of scarcity might actually be an advantage. The agent of persuasion will be able to use the idea of scarcity to their advantage. They will need to find a way to make the subject believe that the item is scarce by explaining why that item is so special, and what it does that nothing else is able to do. The agent is going to have to work their subject in the right way. The agent can also choose to go the other way. Rather than explaining what the customer will gain by the item or idea, they can explain what they will lose by not having the item. For example, the agent could say something like, "You will lose $5, rather than going with, "You could save $5. This is just another way that the agent will be able to make something sound like it is scarcer. There are two reasons why this principle of scarcity works. First off, when items or products are difficult to obtain, they will usually gain more value. The more value an item has, the better quality it will seem to have, even if this is not true. The second thing is that when something is not as available as it once was, the subject will begin to realize that they are going to lose the chance at acquiring it in the future. Once this begins to happen, the subject will begin to assign the service or item that is scarce a higher value simply since it is going to become harder to acquire. The idea that is behind this principle is that the subject is going to want the things that are out of their reach. If something is easy to get, no one will want it as much as when the item is more difficult. If the agent is able to plant the idea that their thoughts, beliefs, or items are scarce and difficult to come by, they will have a much higher chance of seeing success in their persuasion efforts. Persuasion techniques. If the agent wants to be successful in persuading the subject into something, they are going to have to come up with some techniques that will help them out. Every day the subject is going to be confronted with different forms of persuasion. Food makers will work to get the subject to purchase the new products or more of the old, while studios will advertise their latest blockbusters. Since persuasion can be found almost anywhere, it is going to be a big challenge to the agent to find a way to impress their point of view on the subject. The techniques that come with persuasion have been observed and studied for many years, all the way back to ancient times. This has been done because influence is so useful to a wide variety of different people. The formal study of these techniques has grown starting in the early 20th century. Since the ultimate goal of using persuasion is to convince the subject to take the persuasive argument, internalize it, and then adopt it as a new attitude, there is a lot of value in discovering which techniques of persuasion are the most successful. The 3 persuasion techniques that provide the most value to the agent, and which will be discussed in this section, are creating a need, appealing to the social needs, and using loaded images and words. Create a need. One way that the agent is going to be able to get the subject to change their way of thinking is to create a need, or they can appeal to a need that already existed in the subject. This type of persuasion will appeal to the subject if done correctly. This means that for the agent to be successful, they will need to appeal to the fundamental needs of the subject, such as their need for self-actualization, self-esteem, love, food, and shelter. The reason that this method is going to work so well for the agent is because the subject is actually going to need these things. Food is not something that they will be able to survive without for very long. If the agent is able to persuade the subject that their store is the best, or by switching their beliefs they would be able to get more food or shelter, there is a higher chance for success. Appealing to social needs. Next, the agent could appeal to the social needs of the subject. While social needs are not as effective to use as the primary needs, they are still an important tool that can be used. People like to be wanted and part of the crowd. They like the prestige that some items are able to give them and to feel like they belong in a higher social standing. The idea of appealing to the social needs of the subject can be found in most television commercials that are on. In these commercials, the viewer will be encouraged to buy an item so that they can become well-known or be just like everyone else. When the agent appeals to the social needs of the subject, they are able to reach a new area that might interest the subject. Using loaded images and words. When it comes to persuasion, the choice of words that are made can make all of the difference. There are many different ways to say the same thing, but one way might spur the subject into action while the other will not. Saying the right words the right way is going to make all of the difference. When it comes to using persuasion, the example about the phone-a-thon earlier in this chapter is a good example of how words can be used to persuade subjects to jump into action. Persuasion is a powerful tool of mind control that is often underestimated and overlooked. Perhaps this is because it offers more of a choice to the subject compared to the other forms of mind control. In the other options, the subject is forced into submission, sometimes in isolation, by the agent and ends up not having much of a choice in what is going on in the process. In terms of persuasion, the facts are presented so that the subject is able to make up their own mind, even if the facts are placed in a certain way to show them in the best light. Chapter 6. Deception. The next type of mind control that will be discussed is deception. This mind control technique is going to have some similarities to manipulation in the fact that manipulators will use a lot of deception in order to get to their final goal. This chapter will go into more details about how deception works, the techniques involved in it, and some of the research that has been found. What is deception? To start with is the definition about what deception is. Deception, along with subterfuge, mystification, bluff, deceit, and beguilement, is an act used by the agent to propagate beliefs in the subject about things that are falsehoods or which are only partial truths. Deception can involve a lot of different things such as concealment, camouflage, distraction, sleight of hand, propaganda, and dissimulation. The agent will be able to control the mind of the subject because the subject is going to trust them. The subject will believe what the agent is saying and might even be basing future plans and shaping their world based on the things that the agent has been telling them. If the agent is practicing the process of deception, the things they have been telling the subject will be false. Trust can easily be ruined once the subject finds out, which is why the agent must be talented at the process of deception and good at turning things around if they want to continue on with their subject. Often, deception will come up in terms of relationships, and it can lead to feelings of distrust and betrayal between the two partners who are in the relationship. This is because deception violates the rules of most relationships and is also seen to have a negative influence on the expectations that come with that relationship. Most people expect to be able to have a truthful conversation with their partner. If they have learned that their partner is deceptive, they would have to learn how to use misdirection and distraction in order to get the reliable and truthful information that they need. The trust would also be gone from the relationship, making it difficult to build the relationship back up to where it had once been. The subject would always be questioning the things that the agent was telling them, wondering if the story were true or something made up. Because of this new mistrust, most relationships will end once the subject finds out about the deception of the agent. Types of deception. Deception is a form of communication that relies on omissions and lies in order to convince the subject of the world that best fits the agent. Since there is communication involved, there will also be several different types. of deception that could be occurring. According to the interpersonal deception theory, there are 5 different types of deception that are found. Some of these have been shown in the other forms of mind control, showing that there can be some overlapping. The 5 main forms of deception include lies. This is when the agent makes up information or gives information that is completely different from what is the truth. They will present this information to the subject as fact and the subject will see it as the truth. This can be dangerous since the subject will not realize that they are being fed false information. If the subject knew the information was false, they would not likely be talking to the agent and no deception would occur. Equivocations. This is when the agent will make contradictory, ambiguous, or indirect statements. This is done to lead the subject to get confused and to not understand what is going on. It can also help the agent to save face if the subject comes back later and tries to blame them for the false information. Concealments. This is one of the most common types of deception that are used. Concealments are when the agent omits information that is relevant or important to the context, intentionally, or they engage in any behavior that would hide information that is relevant to the subject for that particular context. The agent will not have directly lied to the subject, but they will have made sure that the important information that is needed never makes it to the subject. Exaggeration. This is when the agent will overstate a fact or stretch the truth a little bit in order to turn the story the way that they would like. While the agent may not be directly lying to the subject, they are going to make the situation seem like a bigger deal than it really is, or they may change the truth a little bit so that the subject will do what they want. Understatements. An understatement is the exact opposite of the exaggeration tool in that the agent is going to downplay or minimize aspects of the truth. They will tell the subject that an event is not that big of deal when in fact it could be the thing that determines if the subject gets to graduate or gets that big promotion. The agent will be able to go back later and say how they did not realize how big of a deal it was, leaving them to look good and the subject to look almost petty if they complain. These are just a few of the types of deception that might be found. The agent of deception is going to use any method that is at their disposal in order to get to their final goal, much like what occurs in the other forms of mind control. If they are able to reach their goal using another method against the subject, then they are going to do it, so the list above is in no way exclusive. The agent of deception can be really dangerous because the subject will not be able to tell what the truth is and what an act of deception is. The agent is going to be so skilled at what they do that it will be almost impossible to determine what is the truth and what is not. Motives for deception. Researchers have determined that there are 3 main motives that are present in deceptions found in close relationships. These would include partner-focused motives, self-focused motives, and relationship-focused motives. Let's look at the partner-focused motives. First, in this kind of motive, the agent is going to use deception in order to avoid causing harm to the subject or their partner. They may also use the deception in order to protect the subject's relationship with an outside third party, to avoid having the subject worry about something, or to keep the self-esteem of the subject intact. Often, this kind of motivation for deception will be viewed as relationally beneficial as well as socially polite. This kind of deception is not as bad as some of the others. If the agent hears about something bad that the subject's best friend said about them, the agent may choose to keep it to themselves. While this is a form of deception, it helps the subject keep that friendship while preventing the subject from feeling bad for themselves. This is the form of deception that is found the most frequently in relationships, and might also not cause that much damage if found out. Most couples would choose to utilize this form of deception in order to protect their partner. Next is the self-focused motive of deception. This one is not considered to be as noble as the first one and is therefore more looked down upon than the other methods. Instead of worrying about the subject and how they are feeling, the agent is going to just think about how they feel and about their own self-image. In this motive, the agent is using the deception in order to protect or enhance their own self-image. This form of deception is used in order to shield the agent from criticism, embarrassment, or anger. When this deception is used in the relationship, it is usually perceived to be a more serious issue and transgression than what is found with the partner-focused deception. This is because the agent is choosing to act in a selfish way rather than working to protect the relationship or the other partner. Finally, the relationship-focused motive of deception. This deception will be used by the agent in the hope of limiting any harm that might come to the relationship simply by avoiding relational trauma and conflict. Depending on the situation, this form of deception will sometimes help the relationship and at other times it might be the cause of harming the relationship because it is going to make things more complicated. For example, if you choose to hide how you are feeling about supper because you do not want to get in a fight, this might help the relationship. On the other hand, if you had an affair and choose to keep this information to yourself, it is only going to make things more complicated in the end. Regardless of the intention of deception in the relationship, it is not recommended. The agent is withholding information that might be important to the subject. Once the subject finds out about it, they will start to lose trust in the agent and wonder what else the agent is hiding from them. The subject is not going to be too concerned for the reason behind the deception. They will just be upset that something has been kept from them and the relationship will begin to have a crack. It is often best to stick with the policy of honesty in the relationship and surround yourself with people who do not practice deception in your social group. Detecting deception if the subject is interested in avoiding deception in their life in order to avoid the mind games that come with it. It is often a good idea to learn how to detect when deception is going on. Often, it is difficult for the subject to determine that deception is occurring unless the agent slips up and either tells a lie that is obvious or blatant, or they contradict something that the subject already knows to be true. While it may be difficult for the agent to deceive the subject for a long period, it is something that will commonly occur in everyday life between people who know each other. Detecting when deception occurs is often difficult because there are not really any indicators that are completely reliable to tell when deception happens. Deception, though, is capable of placing a large load on the cognitive functioning of the agent since they are going to have to figure out how to recall all of the statements that they have made to the subject so that the story remains believable and consistent. One slip up and the subject will be able to tell that something is not right. Because of the strain of keeping the story straight, the agent is much more likely to leak out information to tip off the subject either through nonverbal or verbal cues. Researchers believe that detecting deception is a process that is cognitive, fluid, and complex and which will often vary depending on the message that is being exchanged. According to the interpersonal deception theory, deception is an iterative and dynamic process of influence between the agent, who works to manipulate the information how they want it so that it is different from the truth, and the subject, who will then attempt to figure out if the message is valid or not. The agent's actions are going to be interrelated to the actions that the subject takes after they receive the message. During this exchange, the agent is going to reveal the nonverbal and verbal information that will cue the subject into the deceit. At some points, the subject may be able to tell that the agent has been lying to them. It is not always possible to tell when the agent is being deceptive. According to Alert Fry, a noted deception scholar, there are not any nonverbal behaviors that are associated with deception uniquely. While there are some nonverbal behaviors that can be correlated with the act of deception, these cues can also occur when other behaviors are present, so it is difficult to determine if the agent is using deception unless they do an outright lie. Another scholar of deception, Mark Frank, proposes another idea of deception that includes how it can be detected at the subject's cognitive level. When deception occurs, it requires a conscious behavior that is deliberate on the part of the agent, so the listening to words and paying attention to the body language that is going on are both critical when trying to determining if someone is deceiving you. If someone offers up a question and the agent is not willing to answer it directly, instead using some form of disturbance, has a poor structure of logic, repeats words a lot, and uses less time talking for that particular question, they are most likely lying. Basically, there are not many signs that can be considered when trying to figure out when deception is occurring. There are a few nonverbal signs that might be present when someone is deceiving, but they might also have some other issues such as nervousness or being shy. Main components of deception. While it may be difficult to determine which factors show when deception is occurring, there are some components that are typical of deception. Often the subject will not realize that these components have occurred unless the agent has told an outright lie or been caught in the act of deceiving. These are components that will be recognized later on if the agent is using the process of deception in the right way. The three main components of deception include camouflage, disguise, and simulation. Camouflage. The first component of deception is camouflage. This is when the agent is working to hide the truth in another way so that the subject will not realize that they are missing the information. Often this technique will be used when the agent uses half-truths when they are telling information. The subject will not realize that the camouflaging has occurred until later when these truths are revealed in some way. The agent will be skilled in camouflaging the truth so that it is really difficult for the subject to find out about the deception by chance. Disguise. Disguise is another component that can be found in the process of deception. When this occurs, the agent is working to create an impression of being something or somebody else. This is when the agent is hiding something about themselves from the subject, such as their real name, what they do for a job, who they have been with, and what they are up to when they go out. This goes further than just changing the outfit that someone wears in a play or a movie. When disguise is used in the process of deception, the agent is trying to change their whole persona in order to trick and deceive the subject. There are several examples that can illustrate the use of disguise in the process of deception. The first is in relations to the agent disguising themselves, usually as another person, so that they are not recognizable. The agent may do this in order to get back into a crowd of people that does not like them, change their personalities to make someone like them, or for another reason to further their goals. In some cases, the word disguise can refer to the agent disguising the true nature of a proposal in the hopes of hiding an effect or motivation that is unpopular with that proposal. Often this form of disguise is found in propaganda or political spin. Disguise can be harmful because it is hiding the true nature of what is going on. If the agent is hiding who they are from the subject, it can be really difficult for the subject to determine who they really are. When information is withheld from the subject, it clouds the way that they are able to think, since they do not have the right information to make logical choices. While the subject may think that they are making logical choices of their own free will, the agent has taken away key information that may change the subject's mind. Simulation. The third component of deception is known as simulation. This consists of showing the subject information which is false. There are 3 techniques that can be used in simulation, including distraction, fabrication, and mimicry. In mimicry, or the copying of another model, the agent will be unconsciously depicting something that is similar to themselves. They may have an idea that is similar to someone else's, and instead of giving credit, they will say that it is all theirs. This form of simulation can often occur through auditory, visual, and other means. Fabrication is another tool that the agent may use when using deception. What this means is that the agent will take something that is found in reality and change it so that it is different. They may tell a story that did not happen or add in embellishments that make it sound better or worse than it really was. While the core of the story may be true, yes, they did get a bad grade on a test, it is going to have some extra things put in, such as the teacher gave them a bad grade on purpose. The reality is that the agent didn't study, and that is why they got the bad grade in the first place. Finally, distraction is another form of simulation in deception. This is when the agent tries to get the subject to focus their attention on something other than the truth, usually by baiting or offering something that might be more tempting than the truth that is being concealed. For example, if the husband is cheating and thinks the wife is starting to find out, he may bring home a diamond ring to distract her from the issue for a short while. The issue with this technique is that it often does not last long, and the agent must find another way to deceive the subject in order to keep the process going. Research on deception has become a major part of everyday life. Whether the agent means to cause harm or not, there are many instances where deception will creep into relationships of all sorts. The agent may deceive their boss in order to get more time to finish a project. A spouse may deceive their partner in order to not hurt their feelings. While many cases are not to cause harm, they are still present in society. Because of this prevalence, there has been research done to try and determine why it occurs and who may be more likely to perform the acts. Social research. Socially, there has been some research done to see the effects of deception on society. There are several methodologies found in social research, such as in psychology, which deal directly with deception. In these methodologies, the researchers are going to intentionally misinform or mislead their participants in terms of what is really going on in the experiment. This keeps the subjects unaware as to what is going on and will help to deliver better results. A study that was done in 1963 by Stanley Milgram shows how deception will work on people. The agents told the subjects that they would be helping out in a study that dealt with learning and memory. In reality, this study was looking at how willing the subjects were to obeying commands of someone who is in charge, even when that obeying meant that they would have to inflict pain upon one of the other subjects. While the person who was receiving the pain was just an actor and did not really get harmed in the experiment, it was found that the subjects would inflict the highest available pain on the actor if told to do so by the authority. At the end of this study, the subjects were told what the study's true nature was, and people were given assistance in order to ensure they left in a state of well-being. The use of deception in this role has raised a lot of issues with research ethics. Currently, it is being regulated by the American Psychological Association and other professional bodies to ensure that the subjects are being treated fairly and are not receiving undue harm in the process. Psychological research is the branch that will use deception the most because this is necessary to determine the results that would actually happen. The rationale behind doing this deception states that humans are very sensitive to the way that they might appear to others, as well as to themselves, and the self-consciousness that they feel may distort or interfere with the way the subject would behave in normal circumstances outside of doing the research where they would not feel scrutinized. The deception is meant to make the subjects feel more at ease so that the agent is able to get more accurate results. For example, the agent might be interested to find out what conditions might make a student cheat on a test. If the agent asks the student outright, it is not very likely that the subjects would admit to cheating, and there would be no way for the agent to figure out who is telling the truth and who is not. In this case, the agent would have to use distraction in order to get an accurate idea of how often cheating occurs. The agent might instead say the study is to find out how intuitive the subject is. The subject might even be told during the process that they may have the opportunity to look at someone else's answers before they give their own. At the end of this research that involves deception, it is required that the agent tells the subject what the true nature of the study is and why the deception was necessary. Also, most agents will also provide a quick summary of the results that occurred between all of the participants when the research is all done. Although deception is used a lot in these kinds of research studies, they are bound by the ethical guidelines set out by the American Psychological Association. There are some debates about whether deception is something that should be permitted at all. Some believe that allowing deception is not necessary and it is causing harm to the subjects who are participating. Others believe that the results would be skewed if the subjects knew the exact nature of the study ahead of time. Often the biggest issue with using deception in a study is not the actual deception itself. Rather, it is the unpleasant treatment that is used in a study of this sort, as well as the implications of what is going to happen in the study that is unpleasant. This is usually the underlying reason why some are against using these kinds of studies and why it is considered to be unethical in nature. Another argument against the ethics of using deception in these kinds of studies is that the subject has already given their informed consent to participate in the study. They have been read the rules and regulations that go along with the study and feel like they are informed enough about the end results that are wanted in order to sign a waiver. In order to begin, it is argued that if the agent is deceiving the subject and leaving out important information about the study, regardless of if it is in the best interest of the study, then the subject really is not informed to start with. Because of this, the subject should not be participating in the study since they did not explicitly give consent to the actual study being conducted. Regardless of the arguments that are out there on this topic, there have been some interesting findings when the subjects are deceived about the nature of the study. For example, in regards to the study mentioned above about cheating, if the subjects had been told about the true nature of the study, it is not likely that most of them would have cheated. This would be because none of them would want to be seen as dishonest or false to others around them. The deception allowed the researchers to see what would happen in a real-world application. In addition, if the subjects of the memory test mentioned earlier in the guidebook knew the true nature about that study, they would not have been as likely to listen to the authority figure and administer the results that they did. Despite the objections that have been formed about using deception in research, the use of deception has provided researchers with a lot of interesting results. These results may not have been possible without the use of deception since the subject may have reacted in a different way to the study. Philosophy psychology may be the main reason that deception is used in research, but there is also a lot of deception that has shown up in modern philosophy. In fact, deception is a very regular occurrence in philosophy. For example, in the Meditations of Descartes that were published in 1641, the notion of Deus deceptor was introduced. This notion was something that was able to deceive the ego when it was thinking logically about what was going on in reality. This notion went on to be used as part of his hyperbolic doubt. This is where the subject then begins to doubt everything that is available to doubt because they have been deceived in the past. Often, skeptical arguments will use this deus deceptor as their mainstay, in order to put into doubt or question the knowledge of reality that one person holds. The main part of the argument states that everything the subject knows may be wrong since it is easy to deceive the subject. This is just one of the cases of deception found in philosophy. Many works have been written on this topic trying to explain exactly what it is, how it affects the subject, and ways that the subject may be able to avoid coming in contact with it. There has also been a lot of research done trying to determine when deception may be fine and when it can be harmful. This is up for considerable debate. Some people believe that all deception is bad while others see deception in order to save someone's feelings as fine in some cases, such as a husband withholding the fact that someone said something mean about their wife. This guidebook took some time to explore the different types of mind control that are present in the world today, as well as some of the methods and techniques that go along with each kind. Each of the mind control techniques work in a different way. Brainwashing works to convince the subject to change their whole identity with the use of isolation, shaming, and eventually offering a way to feel better that conforms to the new desired identity. Hypnosis allows the subject to enter a new altered state of mind where they will be more likely to be perceptive and open to new ideas. On the other hand, manipulation and deception will alter the current thought process of the subject using subterfuge as a primary tactic, while persuasion involves influencing a person's beliefs, attitudes, intentions, motivations, or behaviors. Except for brainwashing and deception, mind control is a tool that can be used in a positive way to achieve one's goals or objectives. It all depends on the type of mind control that is involved and the intent of the individual who wants to apply it. It also depends on whether the target or subject of mind control will benefit from it. Other books available by publisher on Kindle, paperback and audio. Why is my partner so jealous? How to identify and effectively deal with jealousy, insecurity, low self-esteem and trust issues in your relationships. Emotional intelligence, a guide to managing and understanding emotions within yourself and others to achieve happiness, great relationships and success in life. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, how to overcome phobias, addictions, depression, anxiety, and other problematic disorders. Anxiety management and stress relief, an in-depth guide on how to overcome anxiety, stress, and depression in your life. Meditation and mindfulness, the secrets to raising your awareness, spirituality and inner peace through mindfulness meditation. Why women manipulate men, understanding how and why women choose to use manipulation on men's self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-love. How to build unbreakable confidence through self-love and by raising your self-esteem. Overcoming codependency, how to have healthy relationships and be codependent, no more emotionally abusive relationships. Identifying and effectively dealing with narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths and toxic people. Manifesting abundance, the secret principles of using the law of attraction to manifest wealth, love, happiness and anything you can imagine.